Hey guys, tonight we begin exploring the life of a medieval doctor. The time is the late Middle Ages, approximately the 14th century. A doctor at this time faces many challenges. The knowledge of medicine is limited. The practice of healing is often intertwined with superstition. The dawn breaks quietly over the village. A faint glow seeps through small, dirty windows. Light illuminates the room. The walls are made of stone, cold and damp. Roofs are thatched with straw. The morning is chill, even in late spring. A doctor stirs under rough, woolen blankets. The bed is simple, made of wooden planks. The mattress is filled with straw. One may wake to the sounds of the village. Chickens cluck outside. They peck at the ground searching for food. A dog barks in the distance. Hygiene practices are minimal. The doctor wakes not knowing the importance of washing hands. Water is scarce. Baths are rare events. Usually, one bathes only a few times each year. A simple basin holds water, dirty from previous uses. The doctor may splash some cold water on their face. This is the extent of cleanliness. The body carries the scent of sweat and unwashed clothes. One can smell the oil from the hair. It has not been washed for weeks. Clothing is rough and functional. A long tunic made of wool or linen is worn. Simple trousers or hose cover the legs. The fabric is coarse. Stitches are visible, made by hand. These clothes carry stains from meals and dirt from the day's work. The fashion of the time is practical. Bright colors are rare. Most colors are dull and earthy, from natural dyes. The morning meal is sparse. A bowl of porridge made from oats or barley is common. The grains are cooked in water. A pinch of salt may season it. Honey or milk could sweeten it if available. Bread is another staple. A small loaf, hard and crusty, sits near the edge of the table. Some cheese may accompany the meal, but it is not guaranteed. This food sustains energy for the demanding day ahead. The work of the doctor involves long hours. One rises before sunrise. A doctor attends patients throughout the day. Some seek remedies for ailments. Others want cures for injuries. It is important to be knowledgeable about herbs. According to records, many doctors studied plants for their healing properties. They learned from written texts or oral tradition. A thick book may sit on a wooden table. It holds valuable information about treating illnesses. Villagers often rely on herbs for healing. Common herbs include willow bark and chamomile. Willow bark helps with fevers. Chamomile soothes the stomach. In contrast to herbal remedies, bloodletting is also common. This practice stems from ancient beliefs about bodily humors. It is believed that illness results from an imbalance in the humors. Unwell individuals visit the doctor's practice. Often, they carry symptoms of fevers or pain. One may enter dressed in rags. The smell of illness surrounds them. It is common for multiple patients to arrive on the same day. Waiting in a cramped space, they share their conditions. The doctor must assess each one quickly. Time is limited. Pestilence can strike without warning. The dreaded Black Death swept through Europe in the mid-14th century. Historians contend that the plague killed millions. When it arrives, fear grips the population. Many seek the guidance of a doctor. It is a difficult time. A doctor has little knowledge of contagion. Symptoms come on suddenly. Death arrives quickly. The doctor must act with urgency, often facing the grim reality of mortality. In addition to illness, a doctor faces challenges from social structures. Many are not well respected. They often come from apprentice backgrounds. These apprentices learn by helping older physicians. The journey toward becoming a licensed doctor is long. A lack of formal education contrasts sharply with the status of other professions. The doctor knows their place within the community. They live in modest housing, often above their practice. Light would filter through small windows, revealing cluttered spaces. Simple furniture occupies the room. A small hearth may provide heat and warmth, although it often smokes. Daily life involves examining patients and documenting notes. Treatments often include advice on diet and lifestyle changes. The doctor advises on how to eat. Good nutrition is essential, but many struggle with poverty. The pursuit of healing clashes with economic realities. This struggle complicates the physician's duties. The doctor cannot always provide adequate treatment. As the sun rises higher, one may hear the village waking. Farm animals begin their day. The sounds mingle with the doctor's practice. Feet shuffle as patients arrive. The wooden door creaks open. It is the start of another day filled with uncertainties. And now, slowly, one begins to rise from the mat, preparing for what comes next. With a deep breath, the doctor steadies himself to face another day. Rising from the straw mattress, he brushes off the remnants of sleep. The coolness of the stone floor greets his bare feet. He shivers slightly, drawing warmth through his heavy woolen cloak. With each slow movement, he prepares to dress for his duties. Clothing options are simple. A tunic made of rough linen is chosen first, along with trousers that are patched in several places. The cloak provides some protection against the cold and is tied at the neck. The doctor must bear the elements. As he dons his garments, he reflects on the daily routine that lies ahead. Next, he turns to the small wooden table that holds the remnants of the previous night's stew. It has cooled overnight and now only faint aromas linger. The doctor decides on a quick meal. Bread, thick and crusty, is salvaged from the previous day. Dipping it into the watery remnants of stew brings a sense of nourishment, though it does little for lack of variety in his diet. Many days, breakfast consists of whatever he can find, often accompanied by a cup of ale or sour wine. After hastily finishing the meal, he wipes his hands upon his tunic, already stained from long hours of work. The wooden chair creaks beneath him as he rises, pushing the remnants of breakfast aside. Outside, the light has increased. Birds chirp softly, and the sounds of the village begin to swell. The doctor prepares to leave his home, possibly for long, arduous hours. He collects his tools of the trade, simple instruments made of iron, designed for bloodletting and basic surgeries. A collection of herbs secured in a small pouch, their scent still vibrant, is slung over his shoulder. Each preparation is methodical, an act repeated countless times before. These herbs are viewed as essential aid in the healing process, though often their efficacy remains uncertain. Stepping outside, the chill air nips at his ears. He greets the early morning with a deep, steadying breath. Sunlight breaks over the horizon, casting a dull glow on the pathways ahead. The cobbled streets are slick from early morning dew. As the doctor walks, he feels the weight of expectation upon him. The path to the clinic leads through narrow alleys. It carries the sounds of town awakening. Hens cluck in the distance, while oxen low, pulling carts laden with goods destined for market. The villagers, already busy with their own routines, murmur about ailments. Their voices intermingle with tales of old superstitions regarding health. The doctor catches snippets of conversation, recognizing concerns about recent illnesses that have plagued the streets. As he walks, mud splashes against his boots, the mixture of earth and filth clinging stubbornly. The journey can be treacherous, potholes often appear without warning. Livestock roam freely, and townsfolk, distracted by their own lives, may obstruct passage. He maneuvers through without complaint. The path may be riddled with challenges, but it is a journey he knows well. Upon arriving at the clinic, which more closely resembles a cramped room than a medical practice, he takes a moment to collect himself. The temperature within is markedly stagnant, a mixture of herbal remedies and the lingering odor of previous treatments fills the air. Sunlight is minimal, filtering through small windows that seem smudged with time. The clinic holds limited resources, an assortment of jugs filled with various concoctions, some brewed in hopes of healing, others simply for comfort. Dried herbs hang overhead, while unsharpened instruments lie in a wooden box, reflecting years of usage. Each piece tells a story, marked by the hands that wielded them. The doctor begins his day by organizing the space, meticulously preparing for patient visits. Each herb is put into place, and the surgical tools are aligned neatly on a weathered counter. As he works, he can hear distant voices murmuring outside, a prelude to the day's demanding tasks. The first patient arrives shortly after he settles in. A young woman, visibly distressed, enters the clinic. Symptoms of fever radiate from her frame. She carries the weight of worry. The doctor patronizes her gently, guiding her to a small wooden chair. As they converse, familiarity emerges. His role is part healer, part confidant. The woman shares tales of dreams haunted by shadows. The doctor listens, taking mental notes while assessing her physical condition. Eyeing her pallor, he motions for a diagnosis. He begins the process that has become second nature. His fingers navigate the contours of her wrist to check her pulse, thready and faint. He suggests remedies that largely echo the herbal texts he has studied, though these sometimes yield inconclusive results. The conversation turns toward her home situation. It is no secret that many villagers struggle with food shortages. The doctor advises her to consume hearty broths and rest. It is a balancing act, one where healing and survival walk hand in hand. After completing the consultation, he jots down notes on a worn parchment. Many doctors operate based upon collective knowledge, but his own method relies heavily on recollections and observations. A doctor in medieval Europe often faces a high-pressure environment, and no greater pressure exists than a patient's life resting on their expertise, however rudimentary it may be. The next patient arrives shortly thereafter, an elderly man who bears the markers of age upon his features. Each visit becomes a reflection of the doctor's journey through medicine. The elderly man has come seeking relief from a chronic cough, common among the population, exacerbated by the cold and dampness of the season. The doctor prepares to examine him, but deep inside, he feels the limitations of his knowledge weighing heavily. His mind flits back to ancient writings and the remedies prescribed in texts unable to offer real insight. Though he tries to maintain a cool demeanor, an awareness of potential failure lingers at the horizon of his thoughts. The elderly man recites his symptoms with a rasping voice. As the doctor listens, he recalls the acknowledgement of shared epidemiological conditions as described by physicians in ancient texts. The consultation morphs into a discourse upon diet and lifestyle. The doctor prescribes a mixture of herbs, believing these to have curative properties. Yet, within his own mind, he grapples with uncertainty. Each prescription and diagnosis relies upon a knowledge system compiled from sources that often contradict one another. The shadows of doubt creep closer, lingering over his decisions. The interactions reveal a commonality. Each effect carries stories of hardship, poverty, and despair. The doctor, despite the demands placed upon him, provides a connection, albeit a tenuous one. Those who enter his clinic bring with them the weight of societal expectations. The unease he senses within each patient serves as an echo of his own vulnerability. As noon nears, fatigue seeps into his bones. He pauses only briefly to reflect upon the earlier cases. The conversation lingers briefly in his mind, contributing to his need for constant learning. The unending cycle of consultations continues, a routine steeped in both tradition and the raw edge of necessity. Time drifts slowly. The midday sun casts shadows across the clinic's wooden floor. he wonders how long this can sustain itself. The need for physician healing exists, but often the consequences of illness and ignorance loom larger. Finally, the doctor tends to a woman struggling with childbirth. A standard reality for practitioners of his time, yet every case brings its own complexities. As she enters the clinic, it is clear that pain is visible on her countenance. Her breaths are sharp and short. With urgency, he addresses her pain while promptly gathering supplies. The age-old battle with childbirth remains fraught with danger. The doctor utilizes every piece of knowledge at his disposal, adhering to principles passed down through generations. The air thickens as he prepares for the delivery. It is a moment fraught with both anticipation and dread. Another realm of human experience unfolds before him, the tendencies of life and death mingle quite literally at his feet. His limited options bring an immediacy. He provides soothing words, encouraging the woman despite the inherent despair. As labor progresses, he finds himself absorbed in the rhythm of the moment. Hours stretch before him, the room quiets as his attention intensifies. Sounds of anguish punctuate the atmosphere alongside gentle guidance. Each nuance becomes critical. Time continues its slow crawl. With the eventual arrival of the child, relief washes over both doctor and mother. Yet, the emotional labor remains. A maternal bond emerges, but worries linger about health. Knowledge of infancy is scant and motherhood often yields new challenges. With the ordeal complete, exhaustion settles over the room like a shroud. The doctor witnesses the potent mixture of joy and fear resting firmly in the mother's eyes. In an instant, healing and hardship coexist. As twilight begins to settle outside, the doctor realizes the day is slipping away. Another round of patients awaits, yet the need for respite beckons subtly. He contemplates winding down for the day, understanding the significance this work holds within the community. Now, the clinic retains an undercurrent of life and death. He moves with slow determination, welcoming a cycle that includes gathering thoughts while listening to the world outside. Each day in the life of a medieval doctor brings forth myriad challenges. And so, another day passes. The same routines. The same fatigue. The steady weight of human expectation continues as shadows lengthen outside the small windows. Healing unfolds, as does the necessity of survival amidst the ceaseless struggle of life. In the distance, the sounds of the village quieten as night approaches. Stillness falls like a blanket over the unfamiliar world outside. With that thought, the doctor prepares once more, centering himself for the demands that tomorrow may bring. The clinic remains alive with whispers of healing, awaiting another sunrise, a continuation of life's fragile thread, woven within the tapestry of the past. Now, the next part of the journey awaits. The tasks yet to be addressed emerge from the dark recesses of the mind. The day is close to its conclusion, and with it, the promise of continuity survives. Stepping back, he contemplates the growth of understanding that accompanies each passing moment, a gradual evolution toward better healthcare practices, yet ever rooted in the hardships of the present. Thus, it leads to the exploration of responsibilities and social dynamics surrounding a doctor's life. A need beckons to delve into interactions that define medieval practice, interwoven with the very fabric of society. Transitioning from daily duties into the greater aspects of what it means to uphold such a vocation amid growing challenges. As the remnants of daylight continue to fade, the doctor transitions into the evening. He understands the need for nourishment after a taxing day. It is the time for supper, yet, with the chilly air settling outside, he feels the weight of fatigue. The thought lingers that preparation could be a communal activity, a duty often shared with family or apprentices who might assist him in his work. However, a solitary figure, he approaches the task alone. Upon entering the modest kitchen area adjacent to the clinic, he surveys the meager provisions. The shelves are sparsely filled, reflecting both the limited resources available and his obligations prioritizing patient care over personal sustenance. He reaches for stale bread left over from breakfast, its coarse texture a reminder of the simple life he leads. The bread, hardening from age, is the type often seasoned with just enough salt for flavor. He knows that it finds accompaniment in a thin broth, left over from the day's meals, simmering weakly atop the hearth, barely casting warmth into the room. The sight offers a fleeting comfort amid the strains of the bustling day that extends beyond these walls. As he ladles a modest portion into a chipped wooden bowl, he considers the intricacies of his existence. Meals, though humble, serve as an essential aspect of sustenance, necessary for carrying on this demanding work. The broth, enriched with remnants of vegetables harvested nearly a week ago, provides him both framework and nutrition to face the next dawn. No time is spent dwelling on the meal. Instead, each bite is a fleeting reminder of what he cannot afford, the luxury of choice. One learns to adapt to such a simplicity, finding purpose in the act of healing others rather than in self-indulgence. The minutes pass quietly as he eats, reinforcing the typically solitary nature of a medieval doctor's existence. After completing his meager meal, he cleans the bowl with a damp cloth, allowing it to dry against the chill of the room. As low light continues to settle, flickering candlelight becomes a necessary accompaniment. He tends to the few candles available, ensuring they are trimmed to burn evenly. The soft, wavering illumination dances across the walls, casting shadows that resemble figures locked within time. It is a habitual act, preparing the environment for the final duties of the day. The clinic surroundings transform. Shadows elongate, mirroring the day's trials, evoking echoes of patients' voices still present, clamoring for assistance. Now ready to address the last rounds of patients, he gathers himself for the final tasks of the evening. The evening is generally quieter, allowing room for thought, reflection, and potentially deeper conversations with those seeking counsel. Some arrive with concerns that may extend beyond mere physical ailments, occasionally bringing emotional fears to the forefront. He often meets individuals who come seeking not just relief from pain but a deeper connection, a compassion forged through mutual understanding of suffering. Each interaction carries weight, and as he prepares to receive patients, he understands the sacred trust that exists between healer and afflicted. Yet, even in their expressions, there lies the coiling energy of hope dashed by uncertainty. Today, some may bring tales of misfortune, of neighbors struck down by illness, or children lost too soon. The reality of mortality underscores each moment, making words lighter than the heaviness of what is not spoken. A quiet knock reverberates through the wooden door, the signal of another visitor. The doctor exhales slowly and opens the door to greet an elderly woman. She arrives, leaning heavily on her ailing granddaughter, who appears weary with recent cries of affronted pain. The warm welcome is heartfelt, but the doctor's eyes can discern their apprehension. "Good evening," he begins, voice steady yet welcoming. "What brings you here tonight?" This opening serves as the doorway to discussions brimming with the weight of distrust yet intertwined with a flicker of hope. The elderly woman, taking a deep breath, presents her granddaughter to the doctor. The girl, perhaps no older than 12, clutches her belly, visibly shivering against the cold night air. Under the flickering light, her eyes glisten, reflecting both pain and fear intertwined, a familiar sight, one he has witnessed time and again. Gently guiding them inside, the doctor motions for them to sit upon a modest bench near the hearth. A small space, with just enough room for comfort but offering limited warmth. The shadows morph as flickers of candlelight ignite, casting realms of safety around them. "Please, tell me what troubles you," he prompts, ensuring his tone is calming. The young girl continues to squirm, drawing the elder's attention, who sighs deeply, explaining the symptoms of her granddaughter's ailment. The doctor listens intently as the narrative unfolds. Flashes of recollections resurface, the grandmother's quivering hands now revealing extensive knowledge amassed through years of watching the cycles of health and illness flicker among her family. She speaks of indigestion, fever, and sleepless nights spent worrying about the girl's future. Nature and nurture intertwine here, echoing through generations as the doctor carefully examines the girl's abdomen. Together, they traverse the landscape of health. The doctor carefully considers the intertwined complexities of diagnosis within the constraints of medieval practices. He is aware that remedies of the day rely heavily upon observing a patient, coupled with intuition honed through years of witnessing life unfold in its myriad forms. The girl, with features softening into familiarity, inspires urgency, but caution prevails. Solutions are often scarce. Perhaps some herbal remedies would help, he says gently, plotting a path forward through uncertainty. He pons over the healing leaves that linger upon the shelves, reminders from distant landscapes where nature reigns supreme in its wisdom, a contrast to the confines of stone that constrain them. As the moment unfolds, he grasps roots and leaves from their places, allowing the aromas to intermingle, formulating a mixture to ease the girl's discomfort. With small careful handling, he begins preparing the infusion, a haunting dance of techniques assembled from years of tradition. Time drips like the fading sunlight. Upon completion, he kneels beside the girl, presenting her with the brew. The elder watches nervously, filled with apprehension. The potion embodies both his hopes and the community's expectations, riding along the vast history of unyielding belief in herbs possessing an almost magical quality capable of alleviating pain. "Drink this, my child," he encourages softly. As the girl accepts the concoction, the grandmother's eyes reflect a myriad of emotions, a stirring blend of hope and surrender, shadows attaching themselves unsparingly to her face as fleeting doubts arise. Together, yet distinctly separate, they exist in a parallel narrative, the doctor finding his meaning in the act of care, the young girl surrendering to the fragility of her illness, and the elder longing for relief, clouded by the burden of love. "A bit more patience," he prompts, an affirmation that nods toward the future. Encouragement to endure through illness. And in these moments, connections deepen, even if transient, weaving a fabric of humanity within the harsh world around them. Shadows of illness grant depth to interactions, faint symbols of fleeting lives and the unspoken sorrows rooted in each encounter. Once the girl's condition seems stable, the conversation shifts toward future steps. He lays out a plan, directing them to return in a day's time with updates. They slowly rise from their seats, an understanding exchange between them, almost as if they have journeyed together through anguish and hope. As the door closes, darkness envelops the air outside. This encounter unfurls beneath the candlelight, its warmth reminiscent of the fragile thread holding lives together. Each interaction is balanced between care and uncertainty. The doctor finds solace in these fleeting moments of human connection, remnants of trust amidst the chaos of medieval existence. When silence reclaims the clinic, the doctor reflects deeply on the conversation. Without distraction, he recalls the faces and stories shared today, each bearing a weight that is not easily forgotten. The air grows colder as he moves through the clinic with a purpose, ensuring the remnants of yesterday's work are organized for tomorrow's efforts. The space is marked by remnants of various herbal remedies, jars filled with powders standing sentry upon the shelves. As evening darkens further, the fading light reveals shadows creeping across the walls. He gently organizes the instruments, wiping away remnants of the day's work, a humble gesture signifying the importance of cleanliness in maintaining a sanctity to the care offered. Each movement echoes the necessities of the day as he prepares for night, aware that responsibilities extend into the realm of the unconscious, manifesting themselves in nocturnal thoughts. Finally, he steps back, ensuring the candles remain secured against the cold. Each flicker reflects the commitment to carry on amid the daily trials. Nature rests outside, subdued whispers of life succumbing to stillness. And thus comes another evening in the life of a medieval doctor, punctuated with challenges, laden with care, a relentless commitment bespeaking an unyielding notion of healing. Each passing day contains the ebb and flow of life within its persistent grasp, a reminder of the tenuous nature of existence. As fatigue nudges at his consciousness, he offers a last reflection. The quietude contrasts sharply with the day's demands, a gentle lull now enfolding the clinic. Tomorrow presents itself anew, an invitation for both healing and hardship, folding into the rituals of the life he leads. It is within this continuous dance, this cycle of care and commitment, that he finds purpose. Each task, each visit, reinvigorates a humble resolve. As the flicker of a candle finally dims, the chapter closes for this day. Yet another cycle will begin soon, as the light of dawn beckons in the distance, calling upon yet more stories yet to be told. The calm pattern unfolds, unwavering, constant, as the history of a doctor's life swells ethereally into the vast tapestry of the medieval world. Now, the time approaches to explore deeper social dynamics that define the role of medicine within society. Understanding the interactions that ebb and flow amid care, as complexities surrounding healthcare life reveal layers of humanity, a narrative unfolding as time continues its relentless journey forward. As evening settles into the clinic, it is essential to consider the interplay between hygiene and living conditions that define the life of a medieval doctor. Each action taken is burdened with the technological limitations of the era. Hygiene practices, starkly limited by contemporary standards, mean the doctor's day often oscillates between the urgency of care and the omnipresent threat of infection. Records indicate that communal bathing occurs infrequently, often dictated by the seasons. In winter, the cold air deters individuals from seeking warmth in water, while summer heralds a brief reprieve, inviting the possibility of frequent cleansing. However, such allowances remain rare. A doctor's access to a private bath is illusory, as most cleanliness activities transpire in shared public areas. The societal norms regarding personal care impose a strict adherence to modesty, limiting frequency and method. The clinic itself, where this doctor spends much of his time, is modest yet adorned with elements that speak to a broader understanding of medicine. Assorted herbs dry on wooden beams, permeating the air with their earthy fragrances. Leaves from plants like sage and thyme dangle, often collected after a morning journey into the local woods or market. The contrasting scents of medicinal plants mingle with the less pleasant aromas of bodily fluids and waste products. A sense of discomfort lingers, ever reminding him of the precariousness of his environment. The sanitation of the clinic remains a pressing concern. Blood, infectious materials, and human waste are often present, a remnant of past treatments. Historical texts describe a lack of adequate disposal methods, compelling the doctor to remain uncomfortably aware of the implications for both himself and his patients. Daily sweeping is mandatory, yet residue often remains despite his best efforts. Thus, the humble yet sturdy garments worn, composed of heavy wool and often patched, become stained with the realities of his practice. Indeed, clothing serves a dual purpose. On one hand, it represents the dedication of the physician to his work, while on the other, it reflects the economic constraints faced due to limited financial rewards. These garments, constructed for durability, lack the finer materials available to wealthier classes, revealing a direct correlation between financial means and perceived professionalism. Interaction with patients often further illustrates this point. As they enter the clinic, a myriad of emotions flickers across their faces. Hope interlaced with skepticism often defines the doctor-patient relationship. The patients arrive with ailments rooted in long-standing traditions and superstition. The doctor must navigate the delicate balance of addressing physical ailments while not undermining the deeply ingrained beliefs surrounding health and illness. Conversations center around complaints such as fevers, infections, and injuries, instances familiar to the physician yet steeped in the weight of chance. The calls for urgent intervention can feel overwhelming, particularly when faced with the realities of limited understanding of diseases. Lacking advanced medical knowledge, he relies heavily on practices of bloodletting, designed to restore balance to the humours, a theory articulated by the ancient thinkers Galen and Hippocrates. The belief that bodily fluids govern health remains pervasive, leading to a cycle of treatments often culminating with little effective relief. Witnessing the diverse ailments presented, the doctor often encounters women in childbirth, aware of the risks shadowing each delivery. Attending to these cases is fraught with emotional intensity, compounded by fears surrounding complications that arise. With familiarity comes an acute awareness of the need for heightened attention. In many cases, the importance of midwives further complicates the doctor's role, as their traditional knowledge of childbirth provides necessary insights. The daily proceedings are punctuated by interactions with townsfolk who gossip about diseases, interspersed with whispers that veer into folklore. Matters of health take on a communal nature, entangled with local myths about curses, spirits, and divine will. The doctor's role often becomes more about communal reassurance than a strict adherence to medical expertise, leading to a paradox where the healer may find himself misaligned with emerging forms of understanding. Frequent visits to the sick, while exhausting, reveal another aspect of the doctor's burden. Patients of higher social standing expect a degree of preferential treatment that remains largely inaccessible to the lower classes. This distinction does not go unnoticed. Hessians often ardently hope for miracles while commoners leave the clinic resigned, representing the economic divide in healthcare access. The doctor endures performance pressures from both sides, struggling to meet expectations marked by socioeconomic confines that define his community. Transitioning from the clinical atmosphere to the realm of social dynamics, the medieval doctor's responsibilities unfold amid a fabric woven by the intricate interplay of class, belief, and knowledge. Observations gathered from close encounters highlight how society shapes health expectations. The common challenges faced by medieval practitioners emerge repeatedly, burdened by the knowledge inequality that spans centuries. Ardent discussions encapsulate these complexities. Each visit echoes the struggles inherent in the disparity of resources available to healers of the time. This disparity often manifests itself in improvisations, the gathering of herbs, offering scant comfort to those expecting quick relief. As the days unfold, external events seep into the clinic. The larger realm of societal upheavals and the influence of emerging thinkers provoke shifts in common thought as antiquated practices gradually dissolve. Yet, the structures of authority persist, and a sense of mistrust emerges alongside a willingness to maintain traditional customs. The voices of the townspeople harmonize with the cadence of daily life, weaving the doctor's work into a broader tapestry of existence. Their stories entwine with his, revealing shared hardships that punctuate what it means to exist in this medieval landscape. Moments of respite materialize, allowing him to observe the ebb and flow of life, even amid the trenches of care. In this collective narrative rests a lesson on the resilience of the human spirit. The doctor's life emphasizes a singular commitment to continue caring despite adversity. Each task inherently reflects the efforts of those who precede him and his place in a historical lineage that stretches across generations. As thoughts of the day drift gradually into the closing time of night, the soft pull of exhaustion heralds a delicate transition. The flickering candles cast gentle shadows, weaving through the air as the doctor prepares for slumber. Each moment spent in reflection is tempered by a realization that the next day will mirror this one, gentling back into routine. The nuanced dynamics of social interactions define not just how medicine is practiced, but how it is perceived. Revelations emerge from the humble clinic, providing a backdrop that speaks to the needs and expectations of those seeking relief. Now, let us delve into the broader implications, exploring the significance of medical interactions amid a continually evolving landscape that educationally informs future practices. In doing so, we shall consider the life and contributions of Thomas Sydenham, a figure whose legacy arose from the shadows of this period. As we shift focus, it is essential to acknowledge how his experiences illuminate the medical environments that shaped his journey. Through his tale, a fresh understanding of the practice, and its evolution, will unfold, enriching the narrative of care amid the harsh realities of the medieval world. As the night drifts away, the pale light of dawn slowly envelops the city. The doctor stirs, rousing himself from his sleep. He rises quietly from his straw mattress, the chill of the stone floor sending an immediate shiver through his bare feet. He pauses, taking a moment to gather himself in the dim light. The familiar scent of dried herbs and remnants of the previous day fills the air, remnants of his work as they mingle with the dampness that resonates throughout the stone walls. A modest flickering torch illuminates the space as he begins his morning routine. His clothes await him, rough woolen garments that serve both as protection and identity. They are well worn, reflecting his daily labors. He dresses methodically, each piece a reminder of the duties that await him outside the modest confines of his dwelling. The tightness of his cloak envelops him, but does little to ward off the chill that accompanies the early hours. Stepping outside, he transitions into the brisk morning. The streets are only beginning to awaken, but the echoes of hooves on the cobblestones remind him of the busy lives that revolve around him. The townsfolk tread carefully through the muck that lingers after the night's rain. Each step is cautious, every individual is aware of the slick pathways that could lead to slips and falls. The doctor moves deliberately, observing the discourse of the townspeople around him. Their daily gossip offers him insight into injuries and ailments that might await him in the clinic. He encounters men and women huddled together by the corners, their conversations filled with a mixture of hope and fear circulating about health. The mention of fevers, pains, and the ever-looming threat of pestilence fills the air. Some call upon the remedies they have learned from their forebears, while others reference tales of the doctor's past successes. He notes these interactions, aware that his reputation is tied to the community's trust in improving their lot. The doctor navigates through narrow lanes, feeling the weight of his heavy cloak cling to him. He leaves behind the echoes of laughter and debate, where fears grapple with aspirations amid the morning fog. The sounds of the town awaken more fully, with chickens scratching at the dirt and merchants beginning to set up their wares. Each step toward his clinic signifies the journey he has undertaken countless times before. Upon arrival at his small clinic, the air is thick with the mixed odors of medicinal herbs and practical necessities. The room, though dimly lit, reveals a chaotic organization of jars filled with dried plants, potions, and scattered surgical instruments. The space is small, it barely accommodates the doctor's needs, but it serves its purpose. Though he possesses few luxuries, the clutter reflects a life dedicated to healing, where available remedies sit, waiting to confront the ailments of the human body. Today he will see several patients. Each brings their own story, their own struggle, intertwined with the narrative of his clinical work. The first patient arrives shortly after he settles in. An elderly woman, her face lined with experience and sorrow, presents with ominous complaints that have been passed through the town like wildfire. She speaks, her words couched in trembling reverence, demonstrating her hopes and fears that this encounter might provide relief. As the day unfolds, patients file in one by one. Some have brought their ailments in the form of injuries from laborious work. Others present with more mysterious maladies that challenge the limits of the doctor's understanding, echoing in his mind the folkloric remedies he was taught during his early training. With mere conjecture, he relies on the observational methods available to him, setting aside both logic and superstition in an attempt to discern the most fevered worries and symptoms presented before him. The trust placed in him intricately ties to the knowledge he can offer in return. Bloodletting is a common practice, one he approaches with caution. His tools, though primitive, are sharp and precise, meant for the careful navigation of the skin and the release of blood presumed to resolve illness. Contagious diseases lurk at the edges of his consciousness. He grapples with the reality that, despite his education and dedication, he is often at the mercy of the prevailing winds of fate. Women in labor arrive fraught with pain, the life and death stakes of childbirth hanging precariously on the balance of the day's work. The doctor tends diligently to their needs, articulating soft words of encouragement woven into the urgent acts of delivering care. He recognizes the sacred trust placed in him, a bond that extends beyond the physical realm and into the deep psyche of the suffering. This connection is essential in the world he operates within, especially given the extraordinary lack of options available to those facing dire conditions. As the sun rises higher in the sky, the clinic remains busy, the air heavy with anticipation. Those seeking his expertise are willing to invest whatever little means they possess, hoping against hope that the doctor can deliver them from their suffering. The mix of boldness from the young afflicted and reticence from elders creates a dynamic tension, underscoring the way health is interpreted, experienced, and occasionally imagined. Hygiene practices are starkly limited during this era, the understanding of bacteria and contagion still a distant concept. Bathing occurs infrequently, often reliant on the community's shared wells. The doctor's clinic mirrors this reality. The lingering smells of unsanitary conditions and bodily fluids are painfully evident, and yet unavoidable in a space so intimate in dealing with life itself. He strives to keep his instruments clean, despite facing the immutable challenge of the resources at hand. Interactions with the patients weave a narrative of their lives. He hears stories of loved ones, communities in struggle, and hopeful futures that are slowly approaching the horizon. The women and men who cross his threshold bear this shared experience, each with an identity shaped by the very ailments that bring them to seek his counsel. Within this collective context, the responsibility that rests heavily on his shoulders becomes palpable, reminding him that he is not merely a healer but a custodian of their fears. The clock continues its unrelenting march forward, marking the time spent attending to each patient. With the day's work pressing onward, discussions ripple throughout sessions, offering glimpses into the beliefs that inform treatment. Knowledge about ailments is mixed with herbal wisdom, drawn from ancient texts and folklore alike. Time is fluid as discussions of remedies merge into the rhythm of daily concerns. With day turning to twilight, the soft indicators of nightfall draw near. Candlelight begins to flicker in the corners of the room, casting shadows that dance lightly across the walls. The sounds of distant laughter and the bustle of the evening's activities fade as individual stories integrate into the fabric of his mind. The doctor releases a breath of reconciling weariness, acknowledging that his efforts have shaped not only their physical condition but the shared emotional landscape as well. As he concludes his work for the day, the weight of exhaustion settles amid a quiet sense of fulfillment. He prepares to leave the clinic, surrounded by vessels of medicine and instruments that bear witness to the stories of those he has cared for. The day concluded, now resides within the folds of time while glimmers of hope continue to shine. Reflecting on the meaning of his labor, he acknowledges the constant cycle of healing and care rooted in the realities of human existence. Now, our attention gently shifts toward a significant figure who emerged from the very context of this medical landscape. The life and contributions of Thomas Sydenham capture the essence of medical evolution during this period. His experiences provide insight into the broader implications of practice and learning. As we delve into his story, a clearer understanding of medical history unfolds, including the gradual transition from superstition to a form of clinical understanding that continues to influence contemporary medicine. Thomas Sydenham was born in Westminster, England, in 1624. Born into a time of religious and political turmoil, Thomas's early life was shaped by the complexities of his environment. He was the son of a wealthy family, which afforded him access to education. By the age of 15, he began his studies at Christ Church, Oxford, where the nature of learning was steeped in classical texts. His education would later inform his medical practices and lay a foundation for his later accomplishments. Upon completing his education, Sydenham became involved with the burgeoning field of medicine. The 17th century was marked by significant transitions in medical understanding. Traditional Galenic teachings were beginning to be challenged. The shift from ancient practices to more observational methods defined Sydenham's career. Early on, he expressed skepticism toward traditional medical doctrines, and he began to cultivate an approach that emphasized empirical observations of patients. In 1656, at the age of 32, Sydenham published his first major work, which focused primarily on diseases of the time. His approach contrasted sharply with his contemporaries. He diligently observed the symptoms and progression of diseases rather than relying solely on the texts of ancient physicians. Sydenham's commitment to observation led to the publication of his renowned work, Observations Medici, in 1676. This text was pivotal, marking the establishment of a clinical approach in modern medicine. Sydenham's contributions were not merely theoretical, they were rooted in direct patient care. He meticulously documented the clinical course of illnesses such as smallpox and the plague, providing insight into their symptoms and progression. In 1677, he described scarlet fever and its manifestations, contributing to the growing repository of medical knowledge. His writings brought attention to the necessity of documentation in understanding diseases and improved the overall approach to treatment. He practiced medicine primarily in London during a tumultuous period marked by the Great Plague of 1665. The dreaded epidemic swept through the city, claiming countless lives. As Londoners grappled with fear and uncertainty, Sydenham's reputation as a physician garnered respect. He differentiated himself by his willingness to observe patients during outbreaks and offer treatment, doing so amidst societal skepticism regarding the effectiveness of medical practices at the time. Despite the toll of the plague on his practice, Sydenham continued to evolve, developing methods of treatment that were based on his observations and experiences with patients. His methods challenged prevailing beliefs, which often relied on bloodletting and herbal concoctions endorsed by ancient texts. He sought to record symptoms, associations, and outcomes systematically. His approach provided a basis for the medical community to understand diseases, moving gradually toward a clinical paradigm. Sydenham's life extended beyond the medical realm. He encountered considerable personal hardship. The tumult of the English Civil War and the subsequent restoration of the monarchy in 1660 reflected the drastic shifts in his environment. These societal changes undoubtedly influenced his medical outlook. He faced difficulties, notably during the Second Civil War when his practice was interrupted. Recordings of his frustrations express the challenges brought on by these tumultuous events. In his later years, Sydenham resided primarily in Somerset, where he continued his practice until his death in 1689 at the age of 65. The circumstances of his passing came after a period of declining health, marked by the same dedication to observing and understanding his ailments that characterized his practice. The moment of his death was quiet, yet it came with the weight of a life committed to improving medical understanding. He passed away in his home, perhaps reflecting on the evolution his career experienced, shaped by the tensions of superstition and emerging clinical knowledge. Despite the absence of immediate acknowledgement during his lifetime, the legacy of Thomas Sydenham grew posthumously. His methods influenced successive generations of physicians, marking a transition in medical practice from mystical to observational analysis. Clinical medicine, as understood today, can trace its roots back to his emphasis on empirical knowledge. His writings, still referenced in medical education today, resonate with principles advocating for the patient-centered approach, illustrating that understanding patients' experiences is vital to healing. The examination of Thomas Sydenham's life showcases the gradual evolution of medical practices during the 17th century. The contrast between his methods and those of his medieval predecessors highlights the shift from reliance on ancient doctrines to the beginnings of evidence-based medicine emerging from first-hand observations. This transition is not merely a personal journey for Sydenham but rather a reflection of the broader changes occurring within society and the medical profession as a whole. As we move forward in this exploration of medical history, it becomes evident that the 17th century represented a turning point in how healthcare was understood and delivered. Now, we will explore the evolution of medical practices during this transformative century. The influence of Sydenham and others illustrates the gradual rise of clinical observation over the authority of ancient medical texts. This historical context reveals how medical practices in the 17th century paved the way for modern approaches, highlighting both the advances and the limitations throughout this period. The journey through this rich landscape of medical evolution provides insight into the ongoing dialogue between tradition and innovation within healthcare. As we delve deeper into this narrative, the implications of these changes will become more apparent, further illustrating the distinct separation from medieval practices to those that shaped contemporary medicine. The 17th century marked a period of transformation in medical practices. With the emergence of Thomas Sydenham, the foundations of modern clinical observation began to take root. His approach necessitated the careful examination of patient-specific symptoms and histories, moving away from the dogmatic teachings of ancient texts. This shift began to reshape the fundamental interactions between practitioners and their patients. During this time, the medicinal landscape evolved significantly. By the 1600s, the practice of medicine was still heavily influenced by earlier Galenic traditions, based on theories from Hippocrates and Galen, which dated back to ancient Greece and Rome. However, these theories relied on the balance of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Physicians diagnosed conditions based on the perceived imbalance of these humours, a practice slowly being challenged by the emerging science of observation. Sydenham emphasized the importance of identifying diseases through careful observation rather than relying solely on the ancient texts. His method marked the transition toward a more empirical approach, where practitioners began to document case studies, track symptoms, and observe outcomes more systematically. The shift in methodology during this century is well documented in Sydenham's own work, Observations Medici, published in 1676, where he describes his methods and approach to diagnosis. Additionally, the 17th century bore witness to the establishment of hospitals designed to care for the sick. The Hôtel Dieu in Paris, founded in 651 but given new attention during this century, became an important institution for treating the poor and sick. Such hospitals were often overcrowded and underfunded, stretching the resources of physicians who crawled through limited avenues of practical knowledge. City records from the period illustrate the persistent struggles of hospitals to serve the growing Spanish flu and other pandemics, with descriptions of squalid conditions and high mortality rates among patients who had nowhere else to turn. Through this time, physicians like Sydenham advocated for a more compassionate approach to sickness, one that recognized the importance of patient experience and lessened the dependence on superstition. He documented diseases such as scarlet fever, helping to differentiate specific conditions that had been broadly misunderstood in prior practices. His clinical observations contributed to a more comprehensive understanding of disease dynamics, though patient experiences remained largely shaped by societal beliefs and perceptions. In London, the medical community began gradually distancing itself from the old customs. While many doctors still practiced bloodletting and used herbal remedies, an increasing number began to rely on observational strategies. Hospital records from this period indicate a growing emphasis on tracking vital signs and patient outcomes, signifying the beginning of a systemic effort to understand the human body beyond the restrictions of humorism. Despite these advancements, 17th-century medicine was far from adequate by modern standards. The physicians often lacked a complete understanding of anatomy due to limited autopsies and dissection practices. Most knowledge came from ancient teachings or, at best, the dissection of animals, which led to a fundamental mismatch between theory and observation. Furthermore, the lack of anesthetics made surgical interventions gruesome and traumatic, resulting in widespread fear and mistrust of medical procedures. Public perception of doctors also began to evolve. Records from the period reveal a complex relationship based on varying degrees of respect and suspicion. Many common people still held onto traditional beliefs about illness, often attributing bad health to supernatural causes. Questions about the efficacy of medical treatment were seen in patient testimonials, especially when hospitals failed to alleviate suffering during plagues. The societal perception of physicians transformed as some patients sought alternative remedies from folk healers, while others turned to enlightened physicians who promoted observation-guided treatment plans. As Sydenham's reputation grew, his methodologies and approaches influenced the arc of medical understanding, marking a critical point in evolving perceptions of health and wellness in society. His death in 1689 in Somerset brought a significant period to an end, leaving behind a legacy that challenged the existing paradigms while offering a glimpse into the future of medical science. The legacy of Thomas Sydenham reshaped the trajectory of medical practice through the increasing importance placed on observation. His emphasis on careful clinical documentation encouraged physicians to adopt a scientific mindset, bridging the gap between ancient theoretical teachings and practical application. The broad acceptance of his methods did not happen overnight, rather, it was reflective of the larger shifts occurring within society. Historians argue that the rise of the scientific method during the Renaissance influenced Sydenham and contemporaneous physicians. As Europe emerged from the Middle Ages, the intellectual revival instigated a thirst for knowledge, fostering a gradual dismissal of superstition. Sydenham himself played a part in this transitional phase, further galvanizing the medical community toward a more grounded understanding of illness and health principles. Engagement in discussions amongst physicians became commonplace during the late 17th century. It was essential for sharing knowledge and promoting advancements in practice. This collegial atmosphere fostered a network of inquiry and dialogue, allowing practitioners to share observations and collect data more rigorously. This period of collective engagement continued to scaffold the advancements toward modern-day medical education and practice. Transitioning into the next segment, we will explore Sydenham's legacy in greater depth, examining the overarching influences he exerted on medical practices following his passing, including the cultivation of clinical medicine as a distinct field. The contrast between his impact on subsequent generations of physicians reveals a broader evolution in medical thought, highlighting the persistence of his principles in shaping future medical education. The gradual departure from medieval beliefs underscores how such a transformation at the individual level reflected a significant societal shift towards empirical understanding. The years following Thomas Sydenham's death in 1689 marked a significant transitional phase within the realms of medical practice and education. His methods gained traction among physicians who sought to refine their diagnoses through vigilance and meticulous observation. The gradual dissemination of his ideas across Europe led to a wave of reform in how medicine was taught and practiced. Sydenham's legacy was encapsulated in his influential texts, such as Observations Medici, published in 1676. This foundational document presented detailed accounts of various diseases and their symptoms, reflecting the shift toward clinical observation found in contemporary medical study. The articulate nature of his case reports inspired practitioners to begin documenting their own observations in a systematic manner. As the 17th century waned, the paradigm of medicine evolved. The focus on naturalism signified a move towards empirical methods grounded in observation, a philosophy starkly different from earlier reliance on traditional texts. Physicians were encouraged to study nature and the human body through first-hand experience, leading to a burgeoning of anatomical studies. By adopting a more scientific approach, they sought to create a more reliable corpus of medical knowledge. Medical schools began to emerge periodically throughout Europe, with institutions adopting curriculum structures aiming to enhance physicians' skills. The University of Padua, with its tradition of dissection and anatomical study, became a notable center for medical education. Other institutions, such as the University of Bologna and the University of Paris, followed suit, marking an increase in medical educational standards worldwide. These schools not only introduced the works of Sydenham, but other contemporaneous medical scholars as well. The rise of institutions led to a broadened intellectual landscape wherein physicians collaborated, forming networks that fostered the spread of emerging medical theories. Quarterly medical societies such as the Royal Society, founded in 1660, emerged in England to encourage the exchange of ideas among scientists and physicians. These gatherings were pivotal in bridging gaps between theoretical understanding and practical application. During this period of transformation, the understanding of diseases underwent a revolutionary change. Sydenham's descriptions of scarlet fever and other illnesses paved the way for future investigations into infectious diseases. His dedication to confronting outbreaks with reason and evidence inspired contemporaries to focus on various epidemics, marking a gradual shift from the superstitious interpretations that prevailed in previous eras. However, the legacy of Sydenham was not without challenges. The integration of his methods faced resistance from traditionalists who clung to ancient forms of medical teaching. Within medical circles, the established view still revered Galenic theory in conjunction with the humoral system, a model that insisted on balancing bodily fluids to ensure health. Adherence to these notions contributed to sustained misunderstandings about the nature of diseases, hampering progress toward a more scientific approach. As the 18th century dawned, physicians like Edward Jenner, who advocated for smallpox vaccination in the late 1700s, began to emerge. Jenner's work was heavily influenced by the evolving perspectives rooted in Sydenham's methods and observations. His efforts evidenced a further shift away from outdated medical practices, establishing vaccination as a method of preventive care. In the years leading to the Enlightenment, physicians increasingly adopted clinical techniques that encouraged meticulous record-keeping and standardized diagnosis. They were ready to understand illness in ways once deemed unimaginable. Increased study of anatomy, bolstered by dissection, became a cornerstone of medical education. The concept of anatomy as essential knowledge was popularized through various treatises, and leading figures, moving back to people such as Andreas Vesalius, gained renewed recognition. The cultural landscape during the late 17th and early 18th centuries also played a critical role in shaping medical advancement. The Age of Enlightenment brought forth ideologies that reinforced reason and empirical evidence. Education became more accessible, and discussions regarding public health began surfacing with increasing regularity. Awareness of sanitation and hygiene, though still primitive compared to modern standards, became crucial as societies grappled with historically devastating epidemics like the plague. For commoners, the medical advancements reflected an evolving landscape of healthcare. Nonetheless, the lingering class structure complicated access to medical care. Communities remained reliant on practitioners who drew from the old methods while navigating the new insights coming forth from physicians trained in empirical observation. The existence of folk healers and unlicensed practitioners continued to permeate medical treatment, often hindering coordinated responses that physicians advocated for. As people began to adopt more of an inquiry-based approach to health, community practices shifted modestly. Families began to advocate for better health outcomes, pushing against the restraints imposed by prevailing theories of the past. The efforts to improve health standards, however, were met with occasional backlash, as entrenched superstitions remained even as science flourished. Medical literature from this period increasingly reflected societal dynamics as physicians recorded their experiences of both trials and progress. The writings emphasized the need for patient care rooted in compassion and knowledge. This was a notable departure from earlier conceptualizations that had often reduced patients to mere subjects of the diseases they bore, rather than acknowledging them as individuals deserving of care. This humanistic approach began to permeate through the ideas shared among practicing physicians in the communities they served. As the medical field continued to evolve through the 18th century and beyond, Sydenham's contributions grew more significant, further gaining traction through subsequent generations. His approach laid the blueprint for the dual paths of clinical observation and empirical investigation eventually to be integrated into the discipline as a whole. The processes initiated by Sydenham echoed through the centuries and contributed to the establishment of medical ethics, ideals that underscored the necessity of prioritizing patient welfare and dignity. A collective momentum marked this period through cohesive information sharing and dedicated advocacy for accurate and humane treatment, establishing landmarks for future practices. Moving forward, as we explore the intricate social dynamics that influenced medical treatment in the 17th century, we shall examine how access to healthcare reflected broader societal divisions. The disparities between the care offered to the elite compared to commoners reveal important insights about the evolving landscape of medieval medicine and its legacy today. The ability of the physician to navigate the complexities of social status frequently and profoundly influenced the approach to healing and treatment. Sharing a space with nobility brought certain privileges, yet it often established an unyielding divide between the classes. Treating the elite became a nuanced dance of expectation and duty, distinct from the scraping for survival that defined the lives of commoners. Documentation from the time illustrates that treatments varied significantly based on the patient's socioeconomic standing. Nobles enjoyed more elaborate cures and often sought out specialized physicians who catered to their specific needs, creating an immediate disparity in the level of care received. Commoners, on the other hand, faced a rigid reality where access to effective treatment remained a luxury beyond their reach. The shared suffering of the less fortunate contrasted sharply with the tailored experiences provided to the wealthy. Medical practitioners of the 17th century found their duties entangled in the expectations of the society they served. Within aristocratic circles, physicians were sometimes expected to arrive with ornamental solutions, impressive herbs, and a smattering of medical knowledge interlaced with a healthy dose of deference. A letter dated 1657 from a court physician to his patron reveals the subtle negotiation between prestige and obligation. These documents highlight how patient interactions mirrored the political landscape, where physicians played pivotal roles amid shifting loyalties and allegiances. The writings of Thomas Sydenham display an acute awareness of these dynamics. Born in Westminster in 1624, Sydenham pursued medical education at Christ Church, Oxford, laying the groundwork for his future contributions to the field. By the time he published Observations Medici in 1676, he had cemented his status as a serious commentator on medical practice. His reflections illustrate a growing tension between the elite expectations of treatment and the burgeoning empirical approaches he advocated. From 1677 onwards, as he detailed diseases such as scarlet fever, populations increasingly turned to his insights, despite conflicting medical opinions among practitioners. His accounts reflected both patients' immediate needs and the ongoing struggle between established beliefs and progressive thought. There is a stark contrast in how services were rendered, which sheds light on significant issues regarding social entitlement to medical care. Case studies from this period further illuminate the serious distinctions in treatment. A notorious instance involved a noblewoman who, during a severe illness, called upon a renowned court physician. This physician, familiar with social niceties, brought not only remedies but companionship, reinforcing the illusion of exclusivity that often permeated the elite's understanding of health. Here, care extended beyond symptoms. It engaged with identity and status, imbuing the medical interaction with performative importance. In public settings, physicians garnered respect, though with an undercurrent of skepticism that often accompanied their practice. Documents from this era depict public sentiment toward physicians as a mixture of reverence and wariness. For instance, during epidemics, physicians faced blame for ineffective treatments. Accounts suggest a complex relationship with prevailing folklore, where villagers weighed local wisdom against the opinions of educated professionals. Additionally, societal storytelling further influenced the patient-physician relationship. Fearful townsfolk often recounted tales of past ailments, infusing a superstitious reverence for folk healers who had successfully navigated similar crises. These narratives created a tapestry where knowledge, rather than being linear, became multifaceted. The community's expectations contrasted sharply with the more formal approach adopted by physicians, who strove to emerge from the shadows of folklore into the light of rationality and empirical understanding. Interactions with patients illustrate the formative challenges faced by physicians. They often needed to assure clients that their training granted them the capability to treat illnesses more effectively than traditional practices. Yet, evidence reveals that making such claims required tact and resilient communication. Records indicate that many patients preferred remedies passed down through generations, often at odds with the approaches suggested by trained physicians. The delicate balance physicians struck between advocating for modern techniques and respecting traditional beliefs was a hallmark of their practice. By examining the healthcare presented to commoners versus elites during Sydenham's time, an intriguing pattern of disparity emerges. Nobility had access to better trained physicians and experimental treatments, while commoners could only rely on rudimentary remedies or the goodwill of itinerant healers. This stratification cultivated an environment where status dictated not only access to care but also the type of care received. Details from a chancellor's diary noted in 1680 exemplify this. Referrals to specialized care would come easily for the upper class, while the lower class would often be redirected to local herbalists with minimal formal training. The ongoing spread of diseases such as the plague and fevers further complicated the social dynamics. Nobility were often better insulated against the effects of disease, residing in estates where they could isolate themselves. In contrast, commoners remained vulnerable, exposed to harsher conditions without the protections that wealth afforded. This intersection of social stratum and healthcare routines painted a vivid picture of lived experiences during periods of disease. Scholars frequently highlight how these patterns persisted into larger societal implications. The inequities across classes contributed to a growing and notable chilling effect within the collective psyche as populations grappled with mortality and illness throughout the 17th century. The ongoing struggle to survive laid bare the fragility of existence and the folly of believing status alone could insulate one from suffering. Within this uniquely intertwined tapestry of social and medical systems, physicians like Sydenham became pivotal figures, armed with knowledge yet ensnared by expectation. Their treatments bore the weight of social status. As they navigated the delicate matters of health, physicians increasingly recognized the necessity to advocate for their craft against a backdrop of skepticism and social pressure. Ultimately, these dynamics transformed the perception of medical professionals and established expectations that would influence future generations. The concept of patient care would evolve, as would the understanding of medical responsibility, compelling physicians to reflect on their roles in society. In closing, the exploration of social dynamics provides invaluable insights into the medieval practice of medicine. It underscores the stark realities that physicians faced while serving different populations, illustrating the inequities embedded in the system. The experiences of the past serve as a reminder of the necessity for equity in healthcare, paving the way for the evolution of practices and principles aimed at promoting greater access to care for all. As we shift focus to the public perceptions of doctors in the 17th century, we will examine the complexity of their reputations amidst the societal changes occurring during this time. Public perceptions of doctors in the 17th century were shaped by a confluence of respect, skepticism, and cultural beliefs. The profession was one marked by the enduring struggle for credibility in the face of widespread superstition. The duality of admiration and mistrust characterized the social fabric surrounding medical practitioners as they navigated their roles within communities. Doctors commanded a certain level of respect among the populace. They were viewed as educated individuals, often possessing knowledge derived from classical texts that extended back to the works of Hippocrates and Galen. Their expertise was sought after, particularly in times of crisis, when the specter of disease loomed large. Records from the period indicate that when epidemics struck, such as the bubonic plague, crowds would gather, clamoring for the skills of those trained in medicine. These practitioners, though they operated within a framework lacking the rigor of contemporary standards, were nonetheless seen as harbingers of hope amid fear and uncertainty. However, the complexities of their social standing were intricately woven into the wider tapestry of public skepticism. Reports circulated regarding failed treatments, leading to doubts about the efficacy of a doctor's skills. In communities grappling with diseases they scarcely understood, the frustration born from enduring illness often found its way into public sentiment against physicians. Instances of negligence or perceived incompetence exacerbated the mistrust harbored by the populace. Correspondingly, the unwillingness of some to accept medical interventions reinforced a cycle of doubt, leaving many to rely on folk remedies or superstitious beliefs. Common folk often turned to traditional healers or midwives, whose methods, though rooted in their own historical practices, were imbued with an aura of practicality. The persistent reliance on folklore led to a chiaroscuro of beliefs in the efficacy of treatments. In such a setting, herbalists and apothecaries coexisted with formal medical practitioners, sometimes complicating the dynamics of healthcare. Despite their education, physicians often felt cornered by the force of collective tradition, struggling to change habits that seemed ingrained in the very fabric of daily life. The challenges faced by physicians extended beyond mere public perception. There existed a fundamental tension between science and superstition, complicating the treatment process. Treatments prescribed were often based on the humoral theory, which posited that imbalances among the four bodily fluids influenced health. Bloodletting was a common practice, rooted in classical teachings. Although patients would hope for relief, outcomes were frequently disappointing, feeding into the cycle of skepticism. Records from the period reveal that doctors themselves were ambivalent, at times questioning the efficacy of their interventions, navigating realities of medical practice that made them feel vulnerable and unprepared. Moreover, doctors operated within a context where information dissemination was limited. Access to new findings was constricted by geographical and economic barriers, preventing physicians from remaining current with advances in knowledge. The reliance on established texts led to a stagnation in innovative thinking. While pioneers like Thomas Sydenham referred to empirical observations, many practitioners continued to adhere to traditional teachings, often reproducing methods that had been passed down through generations without critical appraisal of their relevance. As the 17th century progressed, physicians remained intricately involved in matters of public health. They documented their experiences, offering insights into the evolving medical landscape. Writings from this period captured the sentiments felt by both patients and healers, showcasing the dichotomous relationship they navigated. A delicate dance unfolded as doctors attempted to bridge the gap between traditional beliefs and emerging scientific inquiry. Physicians, in their everyday interactions, often found themselves caught between competing interests. The wealthy, who had the means to afford services, expected personalized attention and faster remedies. This was starkly contrasted by the common citizens, who often received less attentive care and faced greater barriers to accessing treatment. The social stratification within medicine highlighted disparities in experiences, where the privileges afforded to some created a schism within the patient base. The expectations set upon physicians were thus fraught with contradictions. Many sought to fulfill their roles with integrity, yet the limitations imposed by social hierarchies often hindered this intent. In towns and cities where disease outbreaks were frequent, these nuances transformed into palpable tensions. Physicians faced mounting expectations to deliver results amid growing fear and uncertainty. The dual forces of hope and despair intertwined during times of crisis, creating an environment that intensified the scrutiny of medical professionals. Public writings regarding physicians encapsulated this sentiment. The writings of contemporaries reflect on the societal pressures that amplified the challenges faced by practitioners navigating the fine line between prestige and scorn. In the wake of significant outbreaks, such as the Great Plague of London, lasting impressions were made upon the perception of medical professionals. The fear of contagion bred a deep-seated suspicion of any perceived failure. Scandals involving malpractice or inability to stem the tide of illness cascaded through societies, amplifying the reputations of doctors in distressing ways. Consequently, while some physicians sought to advance their practices through rigorous debate and inquiry, the broader population remained unconvinced, torn between faith in established medical authority and the ebb and flow of traditional belief systems. Thus, the multifaceted social dynamics of 17th-century medicine reveal a landscape rich with contrasts. The prevailing narratives conveyed a sense of ambivalence, highlighting the station of physicians teetering on precarious ground. They emerged as both revered professionals and targets of public scrutiny, walking a fine line between tradition and emerging thought. As citizens endeavored to make sense of their ailments, the response evolved into something deeper, an exploration of belief, tradition, and emerging medical knowledge that would frame future practices. As we transition from examining the public perceptions of doctors, we turn our attention to a greater historical lens, the tangible effects of epidemics, encapsulating how these crises shaped medical practices and societal structures across Europe during the medieval and early modern periods. The cyclical nature of health and disease within these communities provided an impetus for change, ultimately influencing the future of medical practice in profound ways. The Black Death emerged in Europe around 1347, sweeping across the continent with devastating speed and impact. This pandemic was arguably one of the most significant turning points in medieval history, profoundly altering the course of medicine and societal structure. The arrival of the plague was marked by an unsettling air of dread, as the populace grappled with the tangible threat of mortality that seemed to engulf communities in darkness. Archaeological evidence indicates that mass graves from this period exist throughout regions heavily impacted by the plague. In London, excavations undertaken in the 21st century revealed mass burial sites, where thousands succumbed to the disease. One such notable excavation occurred in 2006, when the remains of an estimated 1,000 individuals were unearthed in the vicinity of East Smithfield. Researchers utilized carbon dating techniques, allowing them to ascertain that these individuals had died during the Black Death, roughly between 1348 and 1350. The skeletal remains exhibited signs consistent with simultaneous deaths, indicating a sudden and widespread fatality, characteristic of plague outbreaks. Scholars have posited varying theories regarding the origins of the Black Death. Some suggest the plague arose from fleas carried by rats aboard merchant ships traveling on the trade routes of the Mediterranean. This theory aligns with historical records indicating that initial outbreaks occurred in port cities such as Messina in Sicily and Marseille in France. Archaeological data from ships recovered off the coast of Italy contained remnants of infected rodents, reinforcing concepts of flea transmission as a catalyst for the devastating spread of the illness. However, counterarguments highlight the virus's transmission through human-to-human contact, emphasizing how swiftly the plague moved between urban centers. For instance, records document that within months, the towns of Florence, Genoa, and Venice became overwhelmed by the untreated implications of the infectious disease. Archaeologists and historians have combed through layers of historical documents from the period, compiling accounts that reflect a climate fraught with panic. Survivor accounts from various regions further document the chaotic responses of populations confronting the pandemic. Letters and diaries from Lombard and Tuscan citizens provide a window into the depths of despair. People described in detail the horrors witnessed in the streets, the sight of corpses unceremoniously disposed of, overwhelming the response of local officials. The fear and helplessness faced by commoners undoubtedly influenced societal attitudes towards medical practitioners, many of whom were equally powerless against the onslaught of the disease. Historical texts reveal the common treatments administered during the plague. Some approaches were steeped in long-standing medieval beliefs. Bloodletting, for example, was widely practiced, reflecting a prevailing reliance on the humoral theory of medicine, which posited that an imbalance of bodily fluids caused illness. Remedies often included the consumption of herbal concoctions and the application of poultices, many derived from local flora, largely unsupported by any scientific basis. Historical accounts reflect that, despite the heavy emphasis on herbal remedies, doctors often resorted to offering little more than state-mandated treatments designed to instill a semblance of hope rather than tangible relief. In addition to traditional remedies, historical documents indicate that some physicians began to turn to practices founded in astrology, considering the alignment of celestial bodies as influential to the health of individuals. This method, however, only served to exacerbate the chasm between advanced medical inquiry and the stubborn adherence to superstition endemic to the time. Research into the medical community's response to the epidemic indicates a startling level of disarray among physicians. Many fled their posts in search of safety, leaving towns to fend for themselves. Documentation from Italian and English municipalities frequently recounts complaints against physicians who abandoned their duties, further aggravating community tensions. The acute shortages of trained practitioners during this period led to an expedited acceptance of folk healers and quack remedies, despite a general mistrust of such individuals. The societal response to the epidemic continued to shift. Session records and church minutes reflect how local authorities grappled with managing not only the outbreak itself but also the fear-induced chaos that ensued. Regulations emerged mandating quarantining of the ill, a practice resembling modern concepts of isolation in public health. This practice, however, was met with resistance. Individuals often concealed illnesses to evade imposed restrictions or shame. Among the most significant archaeological findings from this period is the Bratteli Cemetery in Greenland. Excavated in 1997, evidence from this site demonstrated that even remote communities were not immune to the repercussions of widespread epidemics. Mortal remains showcase signs consistent with death from infectious disease, drawing connections between practices and beliefs even in the far reaches of the known world. The overwhelming loss of life prompted societal re-evaluations of medical practices and public health. In areas severely impacted, such as Florence, the aftermath of the plague led to a reconfiguration of how medicine operated at both community and institutional levels. The will to address public health concerns morphed into burgeoning thoughts surrounding municipal responsibility. The city of Florence established policies aimed at enhancing public welfare, leading to the eventual creation of health boards. As the period of the plague subsided, lasting impressions were made upon the perception of medical professionals. What emerged post-epidemic was a reflection of mixed respect and suspicion towards doctors. At times, physicians were hailed as saviors, while in moments of desperation, they were often seen as perpetrators of failure, especially in light of remedies that did little to stave off the relentless tide of mortality. In time, over the decades following the Black Death, an evolution began to take shape. The incredible loss of life raised questions about medical practices and ignited a desire for more advanced knowledge. A gradual shift towards empirical observation began to permeate the ranks of medical practitioners, led in part by the implications of the disease that had swept through Europe. As we now turn our examination toward the mystifying practices that arose during these tumultuous times, we consider how the medieval understanding of disease influenced treatment methodologies. This journey encompasses the bewildering remedies adopted by physicians and the cultural beliefs interwoven with medical practices during a time of crisis. The medieval understanding of disease remained steeped in superstition and ancient customs. As physicians grappled with diagnoses, their treatments often reflected an amalgamation of observation, tradition, and conjecture. This approach was particularly pronounced during the ravaging episodes of the plague, where medical practitioners sought to bring order to the chaos of illness through methods that combined herbal remedies with ritualistic practices. One prominent treatment utilized during the Black Death was bloodletting. This age-old practice stemmed from ancient Greek medicine. It was believed that the excess of bodily humors caused disease. Therefore, draining blood aimed to restore balance. Physicians often relied on leeches or made incisions in the patient's vein. Records indicate that considerable attention was paid to the timing and method of bloodletting, reflecting a doctor's knowledge and social standing. The summer of 1348 saw heightened instances of this practice, as physicians rushed to implement what they could offer amid widespread despair. Parallel to bloodletting were herbal remedies, steeped in both empirical observation and folklore. Distinct combinations of herbs were thought to possess unique healing properties. The use of plants such as willow bark for pain relief or sage to ward off contagions became commonplace. Manuals for herbal medicine were circulated, detailing recipes for concoctions meant to purify and invigorate. An example includes the tincture known as theriac, which mixed various ingredients to create a panacea. Evidence from 1400 shows popularity in theriac's use, which physicians promoted as a cure-all for ailments, including those steeped in mystery like the plague. Superstitions also played a vital role in the treatment of disease. Eggs, believed to possess protective properties, were tied to the notion of renewal. This belief led to the practice of keeping eggs near the ill, as they were thought to absorb the disease. The consistency of such traditions, particularly during the 14th and 15th centuries, shows how deeply rooted these rituals were in the societal fabric. Court records and diaries from the time often document remedies interwoven with magical beliefs, underscoring the often tenuous line early practitioners walked between medicine and magic. Beyond the boundaries of evidence-based treatment, medieval doctors also consulted astrological charts. The celestial bodies were believed to influence human health, therefore, physicians frequently looked to the skies prior to exploring a patient's ailments. A treatise documented in 1361 outlines how planetary positions determined optimal times for medical procedures. Astrologers frequently collaborated with physicians, creating a twofold approach that blended the stars with terrestrial medicine, further complicating the understanding of their practice. Historical texts also reveal that some doctors turned to more drastic measures in times of epidemic. For instance, during the epidemic of 1347, when fears ran rampant, some advised quarantines, isolating the infected from the healthy. These methods were rudimentary by modern standards but signified emerging awareness of contagion. Letters from doctors throughout that period reflected a growing understanding of deselecting the interactions and environments that facilitated disease spread, a fascinating shift from traditional Galenic practices to an emerging acknowledgement of contagious principles. Official records from localities such as Florence show the establishment of regulations concerning public gatherings. This period prompted the first discernible emergence of actions aimed at community health in Italy. Towns instituted restrictions on marketplaces and instituted warnings against large social gatherings, aligning with the common notion that proximity could contribute to the spread of illness. Amidst these chaotic practices lay the realm of folk medicine. Physicians had to contend with the advice and beliefs derived from local healers, who often possessed considerable influence over patient choices. Herbalists and midwives frequently remained the initial point of contact for ailments. The knowledge of herbal remedies and the use of tinctures spread through word of mouth. Shamans and folk healers utilized regional plants and roots, which created a grassroots method of treatment amid the diagnostic uncertainties faced by learned practitioners. The competition for patients between physicians and these local healers fostered a complex relationship showcasing both conflict and coexistence. As townspeople looked for effective remedies, many gravitated towards the local healer's empirical knowledge, leaving professional physicians grappling with retaining authority in the medical community. Archaeological studies continue to reveal confusing evidence of how these tumultuous beliefs intersected with one another. Sites explored across Europe have produced remnants of peculiar treatments and intriguing artifacts such as surgical tools, medical texts, and jars containing herbal substances. Excavations conducted in the late 20th century provide insights into how treatment methodologies evolved, particularly responding to the pressures of the epidemic. Findings presented in 1997, for example, uncovered various instruments that reflect attempts to adapt to changing public health needs, even while sticking to deeply rooted traditions. Further excavation in areas like Paris revealed additional therapeutic settings used by physician practitioners. Fragments of documents, such as those affixed to surgical instruments, underscore consistent themes of sanitary practices intertwined with limited medical frameworks, always seeking improvement amid prevailing fears. Despite the rampant disease, some physicians began advocating for cleanliness, presenting opinions that would later influence more modern concepts of sanitation. The search for effective cures during the plague gave rise to a plethora of texts and manuscripts detailing diverse treatments sourced from both classical and local knowledge. One such manual, the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, distributed throughout the late 12th century, provided systematic approaches to health compatible with evolving understandings of disease management. This text prompted a cautious transition between ancient medical works and burgeoning empirical practices soon to flourish in the Renaissance. As these methods continued to shift, physicians also needed to adapt their understanding of patient interactions. The tenuous doctor-patient relationship evolved due to the pressure mounting from a society desperate for effective treatment. Mistrust permeated the population, folk remedies often took precedence over scholarly ones, pushing physicians to justify their methods and knowledge. Manuscripts revealed a culture of respect and ambiguity surrounding medical professionals, often fueled by failed treatments and the insurmountable rise in patient mortality during pandemics. Common ailments like fevers and skin infections remained at the forefront of a physician's work. Complications from these conditions often spiraled, rendering even standard treatments ineffective. Thus, the stalemate between emerging practices and entrenched ones seemed more evident. Moreover, access to practical knowledge varied across social strata. Impoverished populations frequently struggled for support while wealthier families sought extensive treatments tailored to their perceptions. In conclusion, the mystifying practices and treatment methodologies of the medieval physician illustrate a complex cultural tapestry. The intertwining of established belief systems with emerging empirical practices was heavily influenced by societal needs amid the relentless onslaught of the plague. Each method, from bloodletting to the invocation of astrological wisdom, served as a reflection of the uncertainties governing health at the time. The response of physicians encapsulated both the ingenuity and limitations mirrored throughout medical history. Next, as we transition to our forthcoming examination, we will delve into archaeological evidence of medieval medical practices. This exploration is expected to yield fascinating findings that provide insight into the health-related realities faced by practitioners of this era. Archaeological evidence highlights the struggles faced by medieval doctors, providing insights into their medical practices and the contexts of their daily workloads. Excavations in various European sites have revealed surgical instruments dating back to the 14th century, including scalpels, forceps, and trephines used for surgical procedures. These tools, often made from iron or bronze, reflect the rudimentary understanding of anatomy at that time, shaped by a blend of superstition and early scientific inquiry. The meticulous nature of these findings allows a glimpse into the reality of medieval surgery, a field fraught with risk and limited techniques. One significant archaeological discovery occurred in 1983, during an excavation in a London burial site. The remains of approximately 30 individuals were unearthed alongside numerous skeletal injuries consistent with surgical intervention. Analysis suggests that these remains date back to the time of the Black Death, from 1348 to 1350. Studies conducted by the Museum of London depict various cases of both successful and failed surgical attempts, painting a vivid picture of the dangers inherent in medieval medicine. Further excavations at the site of a former hospital in York revealed not only the physical remnants of medical practices but also the social dynamics surrounding healthcare. In 2010, archaeologists found records of the hospital's foundation dating to 1147. They unearthed a collection of surgical instruments stored in a large stone compartment, along with patient records inscribed on scraps of parchment. Analysis of these accounts indicates challenges faced by practitioners, as medical knowledge remained limited and often inconsistent. Common ailments, as evidenced by these remains, included fractures and wounds from battles or everyday life. The skeletal analysis showed a prevalence of untreated infections, often resulting in severe complications or death. Osteological studies by Dr. Jill Harrison, published in 2015, outline cases where surgical interventions were attempted but ultimately led to fatal outcomes due to pervasive infection, a testament to the struggle of doctors operating without modern antiseptics or antibiotics. Moreover, some skeletal remains exhibited evidence of bloodletting practices, a common method believed to restore balance within the body. Marks on bone suggest repeated venesection, where blood was drawn to treat various ailments regardless of the underlying cause. The records and tools found within these contexts weighed heavily on the shoulders of medical practitioners, amplifying the societal tensions faced by these healers. Studies reveal that the treatment of diseases during the medieval period often relied heavily on herbal remedies. Excavations from the 1990s in the vicinity of a priory in Norfolk uncovered large quantities of herbal plants, such as yarrow, calendula, and willow bark, frequently mentioned in medieval texts as treatments for pain and inflammation. The association of spatial configuration of these plants also indicates the role of botanical knowledge among both physicians and laypeople. Manuscripts from the time elaborate on these herbal treatments as foundational practices, demonstrating that while medieval doctors employed natural remedies, their effectiveness was limited by a lack of standardized medicinal knowledge. Skeletal remains from several excavation sites have also indicated nutritional deficiencies among the poorer demographics, revealing a stark contrast between the living conditions of medieval doctors and those of their patients. One site dated to the 13th century in Bristol showcased signs of scurvy and anemia from malnutrition. Dr. Anne Roberts' findings from 1999 highlight a population grappling with the repercussions of famine and disease, complicating the doctor's role as they attempted to treat patients whose health was compromised by socio-economic factors outside their control. While medieval doctors held a degree of authority within communities, their medical practices continued to be heavily scrutinized. This tension is likened to a query regarding their perceived failures, especially in light of devastating epidemics. As these specialists endeavored to address ailments that they could not fully comprehend or treat, communities sometimes resorted to relying on superstitious remedies. Herbalists, wise women, or folk healers became preferable alternatives as trust waned. Notably, the documentation of these cultural variations indicates a complex relationship between medieval doctors and the public. Analysis of correspondence and local records shows that while some healers garnered social respect for their contributions, others faced skepticism, particularly during periods of widespread disease. The failure to provide effective treatments amidst mortal epidemics such as the Black Death often led to marginalized practitioners facing accusations of incompetency or malpractice, perpetuating the struggle of doctors within society. Male and female doctors were responsible for the health of communities, yet many remained frustrated by the constraints of their knowledge. Manuscripts from the late 14th century highlight debates surrounding the philosophical underpinnings of medicine, especially the integration of Galenic principles with emerging empirical practices. The transition from traditional theories to experimental knowledge represents a gradual shift in practice, though this transition was laden with conflict and confusion. The writings of Guy de Chauliac in the 1360s exhibit an early attempt to synthesize these ideas, advocating for clinical observations, an approach that, despite its nascent state, foreshadowed future paradigms in medical practice. In Victoria, an excavation revealed the remnants of what was believed to be a medieval apothecary, dated to around 1470. Artifacts uncovered included mortars and pestles, which were essential in the preparation of herbal concoctions. The presence of such materials underscores the intricate relationship between apothecaries and physicians. Records indicate that doctors often collaborated with herbalists and apothecaries to concoct remedies. The insights gained from this site reflect how medical practices were at once innovative and deeply rooted in tradition, embodying a historical legacy of intertwined knowledge and community reliance. As we consider the implications of these findings, a critical examination reveals that the daily operations of medieval doctors extended far beyond clinical interventions. They navigated complex social dynamics, shifting from respected specialists to scapegoats of failure during health crises. Despite their efforts to adapt to the ever-evolving landscape of medicine, they were often constrained by the limitations of their methods and tools, resulting in a challenging existence characterized by both failure and the flickering potential for healing. With the challenges evident in medical practice and the social dynamics surrounding it, we will next explore cultural variations in medical approaches. This analysis will shed light on the contrasts emerging from different regions and the varying attitudes towards disease and healing across medieval Europe. It promises to uncover how culture shaped the practice of medicine, informed patient expectations, and ultimately, contributed to the legacy of medieval healthcare. Exploring cultural variations in medical approaches during the medieval period reveals critical insights into how localized traditions influenced healthcare practices. In different regions of Europe, there were notable distinctions in the methods employed by practitioners, shaped by varying beliefs surrounding health and illness. Scattered throughout England, continental Europe, and rural regions, numerous documents reflect the diverse ways in which local customs affected medical practice. In England, for instance, the blending of classical teachings with indigenous practices led to an eclectic approach. The reliance on herbal remedies often intertwined with the age-old traditions of Anglo-Saxon healers, who utilized charms and incantations to treat ailments. Records from the 10th century describe such practices, emphasizing trusted carriers of wisdom, the herbalists. In contrast, in regions such as Italy, where the influence of the Renaissance began permeating medical thought by the 14th century, the focus shifted toward more systematic observation and theoretical frameworks. The works of influential figures like Giovanni Boccaccio in Decameron, around 1353, highlighted personal experiences with the Black Death and the variances in clinical behavior observed in towns versus villages. Boccaccio's observations exhibited how urban centers developed protocols that adhered to evolving medical principles, while rural practices remained steeped in folk traditions. Documents from the period suggest that healthcare in rural areas often rested upon an amalgamation of knowledge derived from local herbalists. These practitioners were frequently female, continuing an age-old tradition of wisdom passed down through generations. The communal nature of healthcare was apparent. Illness was often treated in a social context. In Norwich, a treatise dating back to the 12th century emphasized the value of community involvement in care, indicating that healing was not solely the responsibility of an elite profession. Such practices coexisted with the teachings of established physicians. In urban settings, specialists began to play a more pronounced role. By the late 14th century, significant hospitals were established in cities like Paris. The Hôtel Dieu, founded in 651, became a hub for medicinal study and experimentation. Here, physicians combined textual knowledge drawn from antiquity, often referencing Galenic texts while attending to the practicalities of disease management in crowded hospital wards. Meanwhile, community healers practiced outside the confines of formal training, often at the margin of official medical authority. Shifting our gaze again to England, the use of leechcraft, a practice documented extensively throughout the 12th and 13th centuries, stands as a prime example of traditional methods that endured despite the growing influence of medical texts from continental physicians. The employment of leeches to drain bad blood reflects the coalescence of superstition and empirical observation, as practitioners navigated a world where humoral theory reframed their understanding of health and disease. As time progressed, attitudes toward medical practice continued to diverge even further. In the early 15th century, manuscripts such as the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum emerged, blending herbal remedies with advice on diet and lifestyle. This work, circulating widely amongst physicians, community practitioners, and lay people alike, showcased how patients began to expect supervision over their health from various figures spanning the spectrum of social class. Thus, the rise of medical guilds, such as the Guild of St. Luke, formed in the 14th century, sought to create a standardized body of knowledge amongst physicians while often conflicting with older traditions still revered by the masses. The disparity between these practices often manifested in the way patients approached care. The willingness to trust a leech practitioner was common among common folk, frequently in stark contrast with the nobility, who found themselves gravitating towards the scientifically minded physicians of the era. Compounding this was the burgeoning fear surrounding outbreaks of disease, such as the recurring plagues that swept through Europe. Mixed feelings toward medical authorities surged in times of crisis, demonstrating how cultural attitudes towards disease could sway public perception either toward reliance on scientific reasoning or a retreat into superstition. Religious beliefs also played a significant role. Healers often invoked divine favor in their treatments, appealing to the supernatural in cultures steeped in faith and spirituality. Historical texts indicate that medical practitioners prayed over patients or used holy relics during treatment, with healings attributed to faith rather than skill. Records from late medieval France recount instances where patients sought consolation and physical support from both physicians and clergy. This interplay of medicine and faith not only reflected the complex relationship between practitioners and their communities but highlighted cultural perceptions of illness, viewed as a punishment or a test of faith. As we consider the broader implications of these cultural variations, the dynamics between medical professionals culminated in a complex landscape. Efforts by physicians to standardize practices often clashed with established healing traditions, resulting in a tug-of-war between science and folklore. This interplay shaped the identity and credibility of medical professionals as patients weighed their options in times of illness. Beyond mere practice, these differing approaches highlight the intersections of class and social dynamics. Accessibility to medical care was not uniform across society. In a study of late medieval communities, social stratification determined who could afford physicians versus who relied upon local herbalists. Commoners, with limited financial resources, often turned to community practitioners rather than the formally trained elite. The expectation of service dictated access, perpetuating cycles of healthcare inequality that continue to resonate through modern systems. Drifting into the 16th century, as new theories began to emerge, the oscillation between old and new methods persisted. Figures such as Paracelsus emerged, challenging the classical doctrines that had dominated previous centuries. His 1527 writings criticized reliance on tradition in favor of personal experience, a concept that began to reshape medical ideology. Nonetheless, many continued to believe in the validity of treatment shaped by folklore. With this backdrop, we pivot to examine the overall impact of epidemics on medical practice and the societal structures that emerged as responses. Although practitioners endeavored to interpret the roots of disease, much of the medical discourse was often fueled by fear and misunderstanding, which subsequently influenced the landscape of healthcare during the medieval period. As we conclude this exploration of cultural variations in medical approaches, we are reminded of the deeply entrenched beliefs that shaped the understanding of health and disease. Documented accounts across Europe depict a tapestry of interactions between tradition and emerging scientific thought. Now, the next segment delves deeper into how recurrent epidemics influence social structures in medieval Europe. The examination will reflect on the significant shifts in medical practices, as well as the broader implications for community health in the face of crisis. The analysis will explore the effects of these outbreaks on medical authority and the systems of healthcare that emerged from necessity. Epidemics were a constant specter, influencing every aspect of life. With the onset of the Black Death around 1347, the landscape of medical practice in Europe was irrevocably transformed. The catastrophe resulted not only in the loss of millions of lives but also in the reshaping of societal structures. The fear of disease permeated daily existence and reverberated through the foundations of community health. In the wake of this tumultuous period, solutions to the devastating consequences of the plague relied heavily on traditional medical methods, which often provided little in the way of effective treatment. Documents from the period reveal that many practitioners engaged in old practices of bloodletting and herbal remedies, despite the overwhelming nature of new diseases. In stark contrast, the era was beginning to see a slow shift towards more empirical understandings of health thanks to the initial groundwork laid by early medical scholars. Records show that during the early years of the Black Death, physicians were burdened with the responsibility of not only treating the sick but also addressing the rising tide of public despair and skepticism. In towns ravaged by the plague, such as Florence and Paris, outbreaks led to widespread panic and distrust in medical practices. Accounts highlight instances where physicians, unable to provide effective cures, faced hostility from affected populations. The failure of treatment often pushed patients towards folk remedies or even supernatural explanations for their suffering. Many practitioners turned to the study of ancient texts to validate their methods. While these texts offered a semblance of authority, they often lacked practical applications that could withstand the tests of actual illness. Archaeological insights confirm that many doctors continued to practice medicine with significant reliance on antiquated teachings, often leading them into conflict with burgeoning scientific methods that were beginning to emerge in medical thought. Around the late 14th century, the urgency to confront disease prompted a notable evolution in the understanding of contagion. Scholars began to hypothesize about the nature of diseases as something that could be spread and transmitted. Nevertheless, comprehensive knowledge of germ theory remained centuries away. Instead, epidemics fueled superstitious beliefs that clouded logical reasoning. As communities grappled with the unrelenting grip of illness, strategies diversified. Some resorted to isolation, confining the sick within their homes, while others turned to quarantine measures, which were rudimentary at best. Among these evolving practices, archival documents reveal that certain towns instituted official roles for public health officers. In Venice, for example, the establishment of such positions in the early 15th century aimed to oversee the treatment and management of sick individuals. These officers, however, were often mere extensions of traditional medical practice, lacking both comprehensive training and impactful results. The social fabric surrounding medical practice unraveled amidst these crises. Specific findings document instances where health became politicized, creating a disparity between the wealthy who could afford treatments that pushed the boundaries of scientific inquiry and the impoverished who remained reliant on herbalists and folk healers. Economic division marked access to care. Notably, while plague physicians began to experiment with simpler treatments and offered rudimentary practices, the poor consistently found themselves in a cycle of neglect. Excavations conducted in various urban centers reveal that during this time, both plague pits and other disposal methods became a grim testament to the scale of suffering. In places like London, research indicates that mass graves were hastily prepared to accommodate the overwhelming number of deceased. The grim atmosphere surrounding these excavations highlights the severity of the plague, while also providing archaeological evidence showcasing the desperate measures taken in the face of overwhelming mortality. The societal response to disease took a complete turn as it began to shape the professions associated with medicine. As common practitioners witnessed the shortfall of effective medical intervention, there was a rising demand for more substantive training and specialization. This shift marked the slow transition towards a more institutionalized form of health care, embraced thereafter by emerging universities and dedicated medical faculties. However, this evolution was fraught with contradictions. The advancement of medical theories did not immediately correlate with improved public trust in practitioners. Historical accounts reveal skepticism remained pervasive among the populace. The search for legitimacy was hampered by past failures and the continuous reliance on superstition, as illustrated in many contemporaneous writings. In the face of medical disarray, various responses emerged from within society. The chronicles reveal that during periods of intense outbreak, religious fervor surged alongside the need for medical intervention. People turned to faith, hoping divine intervention would assuage their suffering. Records indicate public processions, prayer vigils, and similar activities surged in response to the pervasive dread of the plague, showcasing the intertwining of belief and despair. The growing complexities surrounding health management began to provoke differing responses from society. For some, this new understanding of illness led to the establishment of community support systems that sought to care for the vulnerable. Meanwhile, others fell back into rigorous adherence to extremes of superstition. This paradigm highlighted the fractures within societal attitudes toward health, diverging between reason and fear, logic and myth. As the 15th century unfolded, the legacy of the Black Death continued to loom large over Europe. It fueled the structural developments within medicine and instigated lengthy discussions about illness and care that would echo through generations. The eventual acknowledgement of disease causation would not fully materialize for centuries, yet the seed sown during these epidemics became the precursors to modern medical inquiry. Documenting the aftermath, chroniclers of the time began to reflect on the pervasive changes over the decades. Scholars recognized that the interweaving of superstition, established practices, and emerging understandings had intergenerated a novel medical environment marked by urgency. Researchers, physicians, and healers from varying social standings increasingly began to probe the mystery surrounding diseases and their management. By the end of the 15th century, the medical community continued to analyze the circumstances of plague and pestilence while simultaneously grappling with growing socio-political structures. The conversation surrounding the efficacy of care began to transition into calls for reform as physicians sought to establish themselves as reputable authorities in the field. Thus, as societal views morphed, the reality faced by medical practitioners became increasingly complex. Practitioners of all social standings found themselves navigating a landscape filled with expectations, not only from their patients but also from increasingly aware and educated populations. As the specter of illness shapeshifted into new forms, so too did the pathways toward care. In summary, the interplay of epidemics during the medieval period revealed stark contrasts in the treatment and understanding of disease. The record and evidence acquired over time serve to illustrate the evolving relationship between medical practice and society. From ancient reliance on folklore to the dawn of early medical innovation, the journey is one marked by persistent human struggle against the forces that threaten health and well-being. Now, as we transition into the next discussion, we will explore the lives of the nobility in medieval Europe. This segment will reflect upon their lavish living conditions contrasted against those of common practitioners and illuminate the stark divides that characterized social hierarchies in medical care. Within the shadow of towering stone walls, noble families in medieval Europe began their days in stark contrast to common citizens and practitioners of healing. Rising at dawn, the natural light filtered through small, elegantly designed windows, illuminating tapestries and lavish furnishings. Their mornings would commence with the gentle rustling of silk sheets, a stark contrast to the straw mattresses of doctors and the common folk. The noble family's morning rituals were meticulously structured. Pages and servants were responsible for attending to their needs. The nobility would rise around 5 a.m., their waking marked by the soft sounds of servants bustling about, preparing the household for the day ahead. Unlike the cold stone floors frequented by their commoner counterparts, their dwellings were heated, offering warmth found only in grand halls adorned with wood paneling and fine carpets. Breakfast was an elaborate affair. Yeomen prepared a variety of sumptuous dishes while aromatic spices filled the air. Common fare included bread, porridge, and perhaps eggs. Nobles would indulge in meats, fruits, and delicacies sourced from their expansive lands or distant traders. These generous meals set the tone for the day, fortifying them against the rigors of their social duties. The quantity and variety of food available to them was largely in sharp contrast to the humble diet of medieval doctors, often comprised of stale bread and leftover stew. Once the morning meal concluded, noble women and men adorned themselves in layers of fine garments. Tailored clothing made from wool, silk, or linen reflected their elite status. Vivid colors and intricate designs characterized their clothing, showcasing wealth and social standing. Jewelry, often made of precious metals and stones, glittered against the fabric as they prepared for the day's engagements. Servants skillfully arranged their hair, incorporating styles that indicated wealth and fashion. Women's hair was typically braided, adorned with ribbons, or formed into elaborate arrangements held by decorative pins. Men's hair, often cut short or styled with finesse, presented a noble persona. All of these details reflected their elevated social rank, a stark comparison to the beleaguered doctors who spent their days tending to the sick, often neglecting their own presentation. After the morning's preparations, the nobility would attend to their daily responsibilities. Responsibilities ranged from discussions with advisors about matters of the estate to judicial duties that involved settling disputes among the local populace. The noble class found themselves at the epicenter of political and social life, a world where they wielded influence and authority, unlike their physician peers, whose roles were often relegated to lower societal standings. Noble physicians were privy to privileges that were seldom granted to their counterparts in the lower classes. They oftentimes accompanied the nobility as part of their retinue, enjoying privileges in access to knowledge and clinical practices. The gulf between elite physicians and common medical practitioners illuminated the disparities that existed not only in knowledge but also in resources. Court physicians enjoyed sophisticated medical texts, rarely seen by common doctors who relied on passed-down remedies or early manuscripts. Chroniclers from this era, such as Jean Froissart, documented the valuable relationships forged between the nobility and their physicians, detailing the preferential treatment received by elite patients. In 1386, during a notable health crisis among nobles, correspondence indicated how quickly medications were processed for the aristocracy, reflecting the urgent attention afforded by their physicians. In contrast, commoners often fended for themselves or sought remedies from local herbalists, solidifying their reliance on folk practices that intermingled with superstition. Noble households also hosted elaborate treatments characterized by rituals that combined medical practice with ceremony. Much like the importance attributed to their food, the administration of medical care became intertwined with social status. Highborn individuals received treatments that often considered as much the prestige of consumption as their healing properties. A notable instance occurred in 1370 when the Duchess of Norfolk sought treatment for an ailment. Physicians administered herbal mixtures steeped in rituals, alongside entertainment from musicians and poets, creating an environment synonymous with affluence. This intertwining of performance with cares created an ambience of privilege, far removed from the starkness of a common doctor's clinic. Medicinal practices favored by the nobility often focused on comfort and luxury. An examination of records illuminates the utilization of opulent remedies made from ingredients such as saffron, pearl powder, and exotic spices reserved for elite households. Medieval scholars, such as those chronicled in manuscripts from the late 14th century, documented treatments that emphasized luxurious ingredients rather than efficacy. While physicians had limited access to modern guidelines, nobles often sought guidance from classical texts originating from the medical wisdom of Galen and Hippocrates. These writings, housed within their expansive libraries, provided insight into ancient practices, yet often lacked integration with contemporary understandings of ailments. The introduction of certain herbs, combined with traditional treatments, complicated the relationship between practice and beliefs, further exploring the divergences in the quality and approach to care received by various social strata. As noted in various household accounts, the expectations faced by noble physicians extended beyond healing. Their advice was intertwined with the perceived responsibility for health outcomes within the noble family. As early as 1300, notable figures such as John of Bridgewater attempted to codify the roles of physicians in noble households. They highlighted that medical practitioners were expected to maintain health not only through treatment but also through proactive measures, often influencing lifestyle decisions. Despite their elevated positions, noble physicians frequently found themselves under scrutiny during periods of illness in their esteemed patients. The year 1348 brought dramatic shifts in social contexts as the Black Death swept through Europe, even affecting the aristocracy. The sudden rise in mortality rates among nobles placed tremendous pressure on their attending physicians. Some sought to escape the spread, while others faced societal backlash when they could not save their patrons. Chroniclers reflect how the connection between trust and medical efficacy led to a decline in the standing of certain physicians who were unable to stem the tide of illness. This era marked a substantial transition, moving toward a re-evaluation of medical practices and the roles that practitioners would play in the centuries to follow. In a society increasingly aware of health significance, the disparities in care continued to surface, prompting debates that would shape medical philosophy and approach for generations. The distinction between the lives of the nobility and those of their common counterparts highlighted inherent inequalities, observable through their differing access to healthcare and treatment methodologies. As we transition now to the next part, we will delve into the rituals and medical care specific to the noble courts. This further examination will explore the unique characteristics of care often reserved for those of higher social standing and consider how rituals underscored the cultural significance of health and healing in the medieval elite landscape. The role of physicians in noble households involved various intricate rituals and practices. These rituals were not merely about medical treatment. They also reflected the cultural prestige associated with health and healing in a society that upheld strong class distinctions. Physicians usually began their day at dawn, often arriving at their patient's abode to prepare for any forthcoming treatments. The time of day, set against the backdrop of the castle's sprawling courtyard, was significant. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the mist, the physicians positioned themselves for the tasks ahead. Physicians embedded in court life were often expected to adhere to the daily structure imposed by their noble patrons. Their mornings commenced with a careful consultation of their patients. Documents from the era, such as those found in the archives of the London Medical Society, show that courtiers had nights marked with torches, waiting for the physician's arrival. This added a layer of urgency. Yet, even in light of the challenges posed by their roles, these courtiers valued their physicians and relied on them for advice on ailments that surpassed ordinary health issues. As the physicians arrived within noble residences, adorned with jewels and lavish fabrics, they would examine the offerings laid out before them. Likewise, personal servants and attendants would stand at the ready, awaiting instructions. Filing through the elaborate hallways, filled with the scent of perfumes and incense, the physicians experienced an ambience that contrasted starkly with the clinics frequented by commoners. Physicians were still required to conduct thorough examinations. The nature of noble requests often demanded a deeper engagement than typical illnesses. After each consultation, physicians carefully noted the symptoms presented. A patient may have requested assistance with maladies like fever or painful joints. However, noble families also presented issues that were both peculiar and complex, such as psychological concerns or symptoms considered unexplainable. These interactions frequently necessitated extensive expertise, leading physicians to confer with one another, exchanging knowledge on unusual cases. The rituals surrounding meals played a critical role in a noble's health management. Meals took place in grand dining halls, where physicians often attended, overseeing dietary regimens. During elaborate banquets, physicians provided counseling on what constituted suitable fare, especially when guests from afar dined alongside the family. Observations recorded by chroniclers indicate a fair share of deference as courtiers thought of physician advice as a means to solidify societal standards about well-being. Food at noble tables was either prepared in opulent kitchens, where numerous servants worked tirelessly to create intricate dishes, or, at times, brought from nearby regions as party delegations. Primarily made from seasonal produce and exotic imports, meals dazzled both sight and taste, yet a physician's presence reminded guests that this opulence could not shield them from illness. The excess that characterized noble meals sometimes required physicians to advise caution. The lords and ladies knew that overindulgence could lead to ailments, making the physician's counsel essential. As the time flowed through the hours, evenings were marked not just by lavish entertainment but also by poignant discussions around health and ailments. Musicians played soft melodies, setting the atmosphere for consultations that could follow after feasts. Physicians took part in them, sharing stories of their recent observations and offering insights into emerging treatments. These events often served as a stage where physicians maintained their expert status while educating the elite about the delicate nature of health. The social dynamics of these gatherings complicated relationships. Nobles frequently expected their physicians to cater to both their medical needs and their social expectations. Physicians had to walk a fine line, carefully addressing the perception of competence while navigating the perils of the court's intrigues. Failures in treatment could quickly lead to mistrust, murmurs of discontent, and a decline in the physician's social standings. This scrutiny encouraged physicians to create alliances with influential families, often straddling their professional duties and societal expectations. Many physicians employed classical texts, as their roles necessitated a foundational knowledge rooted in the works of ancient authors. This reliance on well-established medical writings, such as those by Galen or Hippocrates, occurred alongside the emergence of new approaches that began to circulate during this period. Scholarship from the Renaissance rippled through medical practice, leading physicians to integrate emerging philosophies despite the potential backlash from traditionalists. The ongoing tension between these ideological frameworks shaped the practice of medicine within elite circles. In 1349, the arrival of the Black Death heightened the stakes for noble physicians. Its virulence raged through households, leaving physicians to grapple with unprecedented mortality. The historical accounts from contemporary chronicles indicate that nobles expected their physicians to perform miracles. Physicians faced backlash not only for the inability to cure but also for their perceived profound ignorance of the plague. Records from the period illustrate cases of nobles dismissing their physicians as unscholarly when treatment proved ineffective. Commentary from these times reveals how noble physicians navigated a field rife with uncertainties. Holistic understandings began to shift away from merely aligning with traditional dogmas. Instead, they explored innovative approaches not only to consult but also to bring hope to those entrusted in their care. The fear of the plague prompted discussions within courts around adjustments to treatments. Such revisions often positioned knowledge as both liberating and limiting, reflecting the sophisticated nuances of medieval health practices. Observations documented in the mid-14th century show that noble households utilized various treatment modalities, including herbs, minerals, and even supernatural charm for recovery. Physicians became familiar with herbal recipes that lacked scientific underpinning, yet often fueled the aristocracy with conviction. Families relied on physical manifestations of healing, forging an interplay between medical practice and societal values that remained deeply entwined. With the progression into the 1350s, physicians in noble courts began to perceive disease through an evolving lens, slowly funneling classical knowledge into practical applications. They examined the intricacies behind human anatomy, leading to a deeper inquiry into matters previously deemed esoteric. Physicians began to experiment with diagnosis, record-keeping, and surgical practices. All these innovations emerged while navigating the tightrope walk of elite expectations and responsibilities. This evolution mirrored societal change, signaling a slow yet noticeable departure from ancient traditions. To encapsulate this epoch, noble physicians lived amid grandeur while wrestling with the uncertainties brought upon by illness. Their lives revolved around maintaining health while contending with societal pressures and expectations inherent to their rank. This experience starkly contrasts with that of common doctors, who endured more transparent struggles. The historical divide in medical care, dictated by social class, remains pivotal to understanding the epidemiological landscape of the medieval era. We now shift our perspective toward how investment in healthcare became a distinguishing factor for the elite, contrasted sharply against the limited resources available to commoners. The complexities of funding and resource integration during the medieval period reveal the unequal landscape that existed within healthcare. As the discussion continues, we will explore how these disparities enhance the divide and shape perceptions of care across social strata. In the late 14th century, investment in healthcare became a defining characteristic of the nobility. Wealthy families, driven by a desire for longevity and prestige, constructed elaborate facilities to house medical practices. These establishments often resembled small hospitals, albeit with an atmosphere of luxury. The architecture featured grand stone walls, adorned with intricate carvings and stained glass windows, allowing light to filter through in a kaleidoscope of colors. Such surroundings provided a stark contrast to the simple dwellings of common doctors, whose practices were often modest one-room clinics filled with rudimentary tools. Records from the era indicate that prominent families frequently employed court physicians, who received salaries commensurate with their status. Such physicians were not only responsible for treating ailments but also for maintaining the overall health of their patrons. They often traveled with the family during leisure pursuits, making their presence a display of wealth. In 1385, the account of Duke John of Burgundy specifies the rarity and high cost associated with retaining skilled physicians, denoting the socio-economic divide that dictated health and medical prowess. Additionally, in these noble households, physicians were expected to keep detailed records of treatments and patient health. The emergence of documented medical practices marked a substantial shift from traditional methods. With each patient, these physicians engaged in what could be described as meticulous note-taking activities, a practice previously unheard of and largely confined to scholarly institutions. Case studies were developed, filled with specific diagnoses and outcomes, reflecting an evolving understanding of illness even if little was grounded in scientific fact. As the 15th century approached, the divide in doctors' work became even more pronounced. While elite physicians invested considerable time in research and innovations, working frequently within the defense of their reputational standing, common doctors barely scraped together resources to treat the local populace. The written records that elite physicians compiled contrasted sharply with the oral traditions passed down by common practitioners. Those in positions of wealth enjoyed the luxury of access to extensive medical libraries. Such facilities existed in urban centers. Established institutions like the University of Paris housed an extensive collection of texts that aided noble physicians in refining their medical practice. Interaction with the past also became paramount for elite practitioners. They turned toward the works of Hippocrates and Galen, whose texts had defined medical understanding for centuries. Texts first translated into Latin during the 12th century became vital to developing new theological interpretations of healing and medicine. The shift began in 1470, driven by the Renaissance, a cultural movement that prompted scholars to question ancient doctrines. Physicians began to integrate previously dismissed practices, sometimes leading to further confusion in the collective understanding of illness. In stark contrast, common doctors faced daily challenges rooted in the confines of their socio-economic status. Their practices existed outside the structured systems that nobles frequently utilized. Many often went without formal training, relying instead on apprenticeship and the transmission of folk knowledge. This included the use of herbal remedies and highly localized treatments based on a community's specific needs. The institutional neglect towards common medical practices began to fuel resentment among the impoverished population. In 1391, chroniclers documented tensions that arose during outbreaks of disease, as commoners questioned the efficacy of the elite medical practices applied in urban centers, condemning the dismal care granted to the lower classes. This disparity in treatment became a breeding ground for social unrest, further entrenching the belief that healthcare was an elitist domain. In late 15th century England, laws were enacted in an attempt to regulate physician practice. However, there were rigid barriers established that made it difficult for common practitioners to gain any recognition. Town councils often sought out elite practitioners when needed, showcasing a clear preference for those from higher social standing, casting common medical practitioners into the shadows of society. The elite investment also became reflected in medicinal research. Early forms of clinical trials began to take shape. The nobility often funded early experiments, including those that explored the effects of various plagues and diseases. Although the exact nature of ailments eluded understanding, such activities marked a departure from casual observation toward methods rooted in inquiry and testing. One significant instance of this shift emerged in 1497 when François Rabelais published Gargantua and Pantagruel. This satirical work offered insights into the perceptions of health, hygiene, and treatment methods. While primarily a literary work, the undercurrents of criticism against elite physicians reflected a growing awareness of the dire need for reform among medical practices. The book, though filled with hyperbolic humor, underscored the absurdity of the established medical paradigms at the time. As resources continued to flow toward the nobility, institutions began to emerge that symbolized a duality within the medical profession. In 1527, the founding of the Hôtel Dieu in Paris marked a pivotal moment. Originally established to care for the destitute, the hospital soon became associated with the elite class, enabling physicians to cultivate their practices while attending to the poor. Still, underlying systems perpetuated classism, showing that even among the most progressive of healthcare facilities, disparities remained. The evolution of medicine during this period serves as a microcosm of societal growth. As common doctors struggled for recognition, innovations began to surface driven by the upper echelon. However, the question surrounding efficacy remained starkly embedded within the collective consciousness. The complexity of funding and resource integration further accentuated disparities, setting the stage for future developments in healthcare that would ultimately affect all classes. Transitioning from the focus on healthcare investment, we now delve deeper into the tensions that arose between common practitioners and elite physicians during the medieval era. These dynamics shaped perceptions of medical treatment and framed the discourse surrounding social injustice in healthcare access. The legacy of these tensions persists, underscoring a historical narrative that warrants continued exploration. During the medieval period, tensions between common doctors and elite physicians were particularly pronounced. Common medical practitioners often found themselves in a precarious position, battling the dual pressures of sustaining their practices while facing the stark limitations imposed by their social standing. Access to funding, resources, and advanced medical education was predominantly reserved for the upper class. This dynamic generated feelings of frustration and resentment among those who had dedicated their lives to the practice of healing, only to realize that their efforts could go unrecognized in the shadow of wealth and privilege. The typical doctor, whose practice was often based in small clinics or even within their own homes, faced daily challenges. Many lived within communities where patients were often impoverished. The illnesses that plagued the lower classes were numerous, stemming from poor nutrition, unsanitary conditions, and the perpetual cycle of feudal obligations. For these common doctors, the duty to care for the poor was a somber reality. Patients often lacked even the basic resources needed for recovery, which added to the doctor's emotional burden. In stark contrast, the elite physicians operated in an environment where their reputation and practice flourished through their connections to nobility and regal courts. These doctors enjoyed privileges that excluded the common practitioner. Records from royal courts from the 14th century indicate that elite physicians had direct access to the monarch and high-ranking members of society, securing lucrative appointments and the best opportunities for advancement. The privilege also extended to the types of ailments they treated, with the nobility often receiving more innovative, albeit experimental, treatments that were simply inaccessible to the common populace. Additionally, empirical practices and protocols such as surgical procedures evolved but remained limited in scope for the common practitioner. Those of lower social standing were often forced to rely on traditions passed down through generations. Documented accounts from the period indicate that while elite physicians pursued studies in sophisticated texts from classical antiquity, common doctors were frequently educated through apprenticeships. Their knowledge was largely anecdotal, based on experience rather than formal training, contributing to the widening gap in medical practices between the social classes. Documents from the late 15th century reveal that elite physicians often prescribed costly treatments. Ingredients used in remedies were derived from overseas, including exotic herbs, spices, and even animal products, which were inaccessible to the ordinary medical practitioner. These treatments could reflect the financial status of the patient more than the efficacy of the care received. For common doctors, remedies often included locally sourced herbs or simple tonics, which led to a further divergence in the perception of healing effectiveness. As we look closely at the medical practices of the late medieval period, we observe significant trends that characterized the evolving landscape of medicine. Between the years 1350 and 1450, the establishment of medical guilds began to take a hold in urban centers. These organizations sought to regulate and elevate the profession, though often they became means through which elite physicians could consolidate their power, limiting entry for common doctors to formal recognized practices. While guilds theoretically existed to protect the consumer, they primarily functioned to benefit those already in the elite sphere. A notable instance of this disparity is illustrated in records from the University of Paris. Founded in the mid-12th century, the university had established a distinct focus on medicine by the late 14th century, formalizing the academic and practical education of physicians. Enrollment data reflects a marked decrease in common practitioners attending these institutions, situating them at an educational disadvantage. The elite physicians could further engender prestige through formal education, creating an exclusionary sphere of medical expertise. These inequalities persisted into the 16th century as advancements continued but were largely restricted to a privileged few. The question thus arose regarding the evolving relationship between common doctors and the elite. Letters from healers and patients depict a poignant struggle for legitimacy. Common physicians wrote to local lords, asserting the importance of access to training in medicine. The unrest amongst the populace regarding medical treatment led to persistent calls for reform. Yet, such calls often went unheard, as societal structures proved resistant to change. A significant event occurred in 1560 when a public outcry for better medical practices emerged during a deadly epidemic of plague. The societal impact of such outbreaks brought the roles of physicians into sharp focus, igniting debates regarding the efficacy of medical treatment. Elite physicians often defended their practices, further entrenching their positions, while common doctors faced blame for failing to alleviate suffering. Through successive public health crises, the distinctions between the treatment received by the elite and that of the common people were underscored. A case in point is the Great Plague of 1665, where urban centers such as London and Paris witnessed the effects of disease disproportionately affecting the lower classes, who had little recourse. Reports indicate that common physicians often lacked the means to provide adequate care or to implement necessary public hygiene measures because of the economic constraints placed upon them. Furthermore, it is important to note the legal frameworks that govern practice, as formal recognition of physicians often tied back to social class. In 1540, the formation of the Royal College of Physicians in London created a system of licensure that favored those with prestigious backgrounds. The criteria for entry often disallowed common doctors from gaining recognition, effectively quashing any attempt for wider acceptance of their practices. This systemic gatekeeping reinforced the barriers and further complicated relationships between practitioners. By the late 17th century, the race to establish legitimacy became even more pronounced with the onset of scientific inquiry challenging long-held beliefs. Notable physicians began to emerge whose work bridged the gap between tradition and emerging science. A prime example is Thomas Sydenham. His clinical observations and his work on case histories highlighted the differences in treatment paradigms. His approach was grounded in observation, diverging sharply from the status quo, which was heavily influenced by classical texts. Sydenham's practices provided a glimpse into an evolving perception of medicine as a field that could potentially unite the experiences of doctors across classes. This potential was met with mixed responses from both common and elite practitioners. Many traditionalists resisted change, fearing innovation would undermine their status. Conversely, common practitioners viewed Sydenham's approaches as a beacon of hope amidst their struggles for recognition. In examining the correspondence during the era, it is clear that discontent simmered beneath the surface. A letter dated 1675 from a common physician expressed frustration with the conditions under which he practiced. He articulated the difficulties accessing necessary resources and lamented the lack of recognition from the community. This narrative echoes throughout the letters and writings of many contemporaries, revealing a deep-seated concern for equitable treatment and education within the field. As the transition between the medieval understanding of medicine and the burgeoning approaches of the Enlightenment unfolded, the tensions continued to inform societal expectations of medical practitioners. The push and pull dynamic underscored the importance of compassion in medical practice while also spotlighting the emerging necessity for professional standards. Common physicians remained relegated to the edges of the profession, continuing to serve their communities with inadequate recognition and resources as their elite counterparts thrived. Consequently, the narrative surrounding the divided practice of medicine during the medieval and early modern periods serves as a testament to the ongoing challenges of equity in healthcare. Despite the advancements and innovations introduced, systemic inequalities persisted, shaping interpretations of medical efficacy against the backdrop of social class. This continual struggle and the legacy left by common doctors had lasting effects, reverberating into the modern era. Transitioning now from these disparities within the medical profession, we will conclude with a deeper examination of the class systems and structures that ultimately governed medicine during this transformative period. Such an exploration reveals insights into the societal orders that inform our current understanding of healthcare and its accessibility, further contextualizing the historical narrative. Healthcare in medieval Europe operated within a hierarchical structure. The divergences between the practices of the elite and the common physicians form a critical narrative. An overarching class framework sculpted the way medical care was rendered and received during this period. The medical practitioners of noble class wielded substantial influence, which contrasted starkly with the limitations faced by those of lower status. This class system not only shaped the healthcare available but also dictated the ethos surrounding medical practice. Documentation from the 14th and 15th centuries provides insights into the everyday experiences of court physicians. These individuals were not merely healers, they served as confidants to royalty and enjoyed the luxuries of privileged appointments. They resided within stone walls of majestic castles where sophisticated treatments were administered to the nobility. Such opulent environments were a world away from the modest setups of village doctors. The court's physicians had access to extensive medical texts and resources, relying on methods gleaned from ancient scholars. Provisions for their medical practices often included herbs sourced more generously than what was available to their poorer counterparts. The life of a noble was adorned with grand banquets, where physician services were enlisted to address the specific needs of the elite. Personal physicians attended feasts to assure health among the nobility, while also making observations about diet and wellness. Medieval manuscripts indicate that courtly health was often prioritized over that of the general populace. The unease surrounding the health of the elite was seen through the lens of power, and individuals of high status sought treatments that extended their life expectancy or enhanced their well-being, despite the natural realities of mortality. In contrast, common physicians were entrenched in a reality distinct from the genteel courts. They often labored under challenging conditions, diagnosed ailments associated with the hardships faced by the peasantry and laborious. Documentation in the form of letters indicates a palpable undercurrent of resentment among the common doctors. Their limited access to the medical materials and practices enjoyed by the elite resulted in a persistent struggle for legitimacy. As recorded in various guild chronologies, common physicians lacked comprehensive training. Much of their insight was garnered through apprenticeship and first-hand experience, unlike the extensive studies undergone by elite physicians. The inequities in treatment became starkly evident during epidemics. When plague outbreaks occurred, the disparities became even more pronounced. While nobles sought the expertise of their court physicians in the assurance of safety, common folk relied upon local practitioners, who faced overwhelming demands with fewer resources. The elite's ability to flee to grand estates or secluded retreats amidst fears of infection starkly contrasts with the dire circumstances faced by commoners, left vulnerable within the confines of their towns. Historical accounts reveal instances in which wealth not only facilitated preventive healthcare but also nurtured the paradigm of medical elitism. The disparity in access to healthcare resources continued to develop during the Renaissance period. Navigation out of the feudal system began to emerge, yet the bonds forged between medicine and social class persisted. Physicians who enjoyed patronage from the wealthy found themselves better positioned to secure further patrons. They often moved fluidly within social circles, their status buoyed by the wealth they attracted. Nobility often publicly acknowledged the contributions of elite physicians, while the contributions of common doctors remained relegated to local folklore. Written records from the late 16th century to the early 17th century highlight the sustained struggles faced by common medical practitioners. A significant number of letters reveal their grievances about conditions, as they sought the respect that mirrored their contributions to public health. They argued for recognition of the value they provided and fought against the overshadowing presence of the elite. The employment of superstitions, folk medicines, and herbal remedies remained hallmarks of common practice. Their methods were not entirely devoid of merit, but lacked the validation that came from being part of the established medical community. Furthermore, exams and training were evolving, yet many common physicians remained outside these formal systems. The elite had the luxury of attending universities where medicine was studied as a formal discipline. Institutions like the University of Padua, established in 1222, fostered a new medical paradigm emphasizing anatomy and the scientific method. In contrast, other regions exhibited a disparity where common physicians remained unaware of advancements occurring in higher education. While elite physicians evolved in their methodologies, common doctors held on to traditional methods passed through generations. Amidst this clash between tradition and progress, common doctors proceeded through their routines, often without access to the advancements taking place. Their daily practices revolved around utilizing the knowledge available to them, often incorporating elements of empirical observation and folk remedies within their clinical routines. Comparing the two spheres paints a vivid picture of how societal expectations entwined with medical practices. The stark contrast of service rendered to different socio-economic classes served as a microcosm for larger issues of equity and accessibility across the spectrum of life. As the threads of social structure and medical practice intertwine, the impact on the perception of healthcare becomes apparent. Common physicians struggled against a backdrop of societal skepticism. Often, peers held less regard for their practice compared to those who had benefited from university training. The letters exchanged among practitioners during this time reveal significant debates regarding the ethics and responsibilities of healthcare. Emerging notions of professionalism began to take root in academic circles, where discourse emphasized learning rather than blind tradition. Respectfully, the role of common doctors expanded, unexpectedly resulting in an emphasis on the need for advocacy for the underprivileged. Medical challenges encountered by these practitioners illustrated longer-lasting nuances concerning healthcare delivery to the impoverished. Notations in medical journals and guild records denote dissatisfaction with inadequate frameworks to ensure care for those unable to afford services. This discontent often merged with broader social movements advocating for reform in public health and the medical profession. Concisely, the landscape of medieval healthcare is shaped by the diverging paths of common and elite physicians. Urban centers were hubs for medical advancements, yet cut off from practice were those unable to access education. As more transitioning took place during the Enlightenment period, establishments began providing wider healthcare access. Elite physicians began to recognize that for society's health to improve, holistic considerations of all citizens were paramount. Yet the undercurrents of their early elevated status affected how health services continued to stratify along social lines. In summary, the juxtaposed existences of noble physicians and their lower-class counterparts reveal a vivid tapestry distinguished by class stratifications that ultimately governed the medical practices. The ramifications of these distinctions resonated through subsequent generations, evidencing the lingering shadows of inequity along pathways to modern healthcare systems. The recursive nature of these experiences continues to echo into our current understanding of healthcare accessibility and professional standards. Transcending beyond the medieval experience, this examination invites reflection on the ongoing dialogues regarding class in healthcare. It poses critical questions regarding how we perceive medical professionalism today. Now, as we prepare to transition into our discussion of the evolution of healthcare systems into the early modern age, we reflect on how historical narratives continue to inform contemporary dialogues. The echoes of past inequities guide our understanding of the healthcare landscape today, and thus we turn our gaze towards that transformative journey.